Okay, thank you. So I just want to make an announcement with respect to timing. Looking at the agenda that we have for the regular meeting, and also I think at the last meeting I mentioned that I'm going to be giving a proclamation for Ramadan, but because of sundown, the people who really want to participate won't be able to do so around 8 o'clock. It's my plan to go right into the regular session after the special meeting ends, unless the special meeting ends a good 5, 10, 15 minutes before 7 o'clock. But if we go right from the special meeting into the regular meeting, then at 8 o'clock, we can take our first break of the evening, either before or after the proclamation, and we should be on target at that point for, I think, a pretty good meeting in terms of time. So everyone should sort of be ready for that. Okay? And with that, let's go into our discussion items. So we have one discussion item.
So, Mayor, if I may, I just want to clarify with the city attorney, if I heard you correctly. So are you saying that we may start the regular session before 7 p.m.?
No.
Okay.
We're not going to start the regular session before 7 p.m. Okay. If this meeting ends 5, 10, 15 minutes before 7, we will take a break until 7 o'clock. If this meeting goes right up to or after 7, then it's my intention to go right into the regular meeting. There'll just be a minute or two break while staff switches over the YouTube. Okay. So we have one discussion item tonight. Before the staff report, I will invite public comment. This will be the only time for the public to comment on the one item. So, Madam City Clerk, I understand we have speakers?
Yes, we have 3 speaker cards.
Okay. I'll give each speaker 3 minutes, please.
The first speaker is John Baer.
Good evening. First to the elephant in the room. I know there are different opinions on this council and in this room on the issue of historic preservation. And my comments tonight are specifically about the fees that are being proposed for historic properties. And before you is a chart I put together from publicly available information about the fees proposed by Los Altos and the fees in various other communities in Santa Clara County. It's not an exhaustive list. But before I do that, I'm going to read from official city documents. The city of Los Altos is a community that celebrates its history. This rich past has been incorporated into the fabric of the city and provides a link to the community's heritage and history. The remaining sites and structure of architecture and of historic significance enhance the community's unique character and contribute to its sense of place. It is hereby declared as a matter of public policy that the recognition, preservation, enhancement, and use of historic resources within the city of Los Altos is required in the interest of health, economic prosperity, culture enrichment, and general welfare of the people. So we may disagree on historic properties, but you as a city council and we as a community have an obligation to preserve and protect and enhance and encourage historic preservation. And the fees that are being proposed here, number one, are significantly out of line with other cities in Santa Clara County, and they provide a disincentive for historic preservation. And they do not include the fees that the applicants pay to prepare for being listed as a landmark or looking for Mills Act. I checked with the 2 most recent applicants for landmark and Mills Act status, and their out-of-pocket costs was $8,000 to $10,000. So I am encouraging this city council as a matter of public policy to not implement increases or new fees for historic properties. The cost of historic preservation is significant. The commitment of people in this community to preserve is real, and we don't want to create disincentives by a fee structure that takes the money that could be used on historic preservation and puts it back in the city coffers. The amount of money that would be generated is de minimis compared to fees from other sources. but it creates a strong economic hardship for those who are trying to implement what the city is asking the community to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment.
The next speaker is Lois Bayer.
Good evening. My name is Lois Baer, and I, along with my husband, own a historic property, a home in Los Altos. Owning a historic home requires quite a bit of different thinking than just any other home, because there's clearly additional time and research and effort, and of course money that's involved in preparing any kind of maintenance or restoration for such a home. Imposition of the fees that are suggested here tonight makes all of that additionally more challenging and of course more costly for the homeowner, and it will dissuade others from seeking to purchase and restore or maintain such an historic home. I can tell you from personal experience that entire neighborhoods take pride in any historic home. It is such a benefit to the community. Having done restoration, both restoration and maintenance in our home, I can tell you that it is amazing to me how many comments we get from people in our neighborhood. I have even seen people standing in the street taking pictures of our home, people I don't know. So I would certainly urge all of you to please not impose the fees that have been contemplated and discussed here tonight. I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Phoebe.
I'm sorry, I think there's a question from a council member? Well, let Mr. Baer, if you're willing to entertain a question, there's a question from a council member. Let's do it now, please.
Thank you for providing this chart that you provided today. So we're saying that Los Altos, which had 0 fees now, is implementing fees we were much like Los Gatos, but these fees are now just going to be a fees that is your understanding that you have to pull these permits
Right,
now
so
that you
the
already have a historic home and your historic home is already established, and why do you feel that?
So these fees are in addition to any other building or planning fees. And previously, the city did not require any of these additional fees, despite the fact, as I mentioned earlier, that homeowners actually incur significant costs in order to qualify for landmark or Mills Act. These fees that are being proposed are very significant to what we had before, which was 0, and very significant compared to other communities, with Los Gatos being at the very low end of 0, and other communities having, a couple of $100 fee for something that is being proposed. We charge $7,000 for. It's big numbers.
So you have a Mills Act home.
We have Mills Act. We are city landmark number 1. We have Mills Act. We got that.
You don't need a permit then. You're covered.
I'm not asking this for ourselves.
Yeah.
We are done. I don't believe we will
Right.
will require any other permits of the city in the
Okay.
future. This is not being requested for our benefit. It's being requested for the benefit of the community and to help encourage people to do what is in the city requirements, which is to preserve historic properties.
Thank you. I think the Vice Mayor also has a question.
Thank you both for for being here and making these comments, and for representing the portion of the community that is intensely involved with preservation. The Mills Act generally saves people 40 to 60% on property tax. That depends on when you bought your property, But all other things being equal, is that your experience as well, that you've had substantial property tax savings?
Right, so Mills Act will save you a significant sum. That amount of money that you save by contract has to be put into the ongoing maintenance, restoration, repair, renovation of the property. I will tell you, in the 27 years we've owned our house, we've put in about 50 years worth of savings. So, you know, while it...
And it's a beautiful home.
And thank you. But the point is, while it, you know, people who preserve homes, the magnitude of the work that has to be done, the cost of that work is breathtaking. That's why they make movies about, you know, the money pit. All right. I mean, it's true. It really is. And my wife reminds me of that very often. You know, it's very expensive, and so we appreciate the Mills Act, but particularly when people are starting off renovating a house, trying to restore it, adding $5,000 and $10,000 on top of everything else, it really starts to add up. It really becomes burdensome for folks who are trying to renovate.
So I wasn't done with my question. After you're done, I have one more question. Okay, so when you're in a historic home, so it is my understanding then, my concern, or I'm reading as this, is they have this thing called historic alteration. So when your home has to perhaps change a window, is that considered a historic alteration? And then you will need to get this $7,172 permit?
Right. So well, I don't know. I was surprised when we did our most recent landscape and hardscape that in reading the regulations, it did not appear as though we needed a historic alteration permit. In fact, we were reminded by staff that we did. It was administratively granted, which we're grateful for, primarily because of the time commitment. But in reading what is being proposed, it's a little unclear to me where and when the $7,000 would apply, because when you do work, there's a broad range of the kind of work that you do, from things that are relatively minor to things that are often very major and significant.
Why do you feel you would need a permit for landscaping when landscaping doesn't require permits?
I'll defer to staff on that one.
Okay, I'll ask staff
I believe we're
later.
getting into discussion
No,
beyond
I'll
the
ask
confines of what
questions.
this study session is. So I'm not going to answer that at this set session. There's particulars about the specific permit. There was materials that were not previously on the site that were proposed. And in order for us to do what Mr. Bear, as well as as other individuals in the community want us to do, which is to preserve and protect historic properties, I believe the city did its due diligence by ensuring that everything that was improved and modified on the property was sufficient and adhered to Chapter 12.44 of the municipal code. Other than
Okay.
that, there's
Thank
nothing
you.
else.
I kind of like to get us to
Thank
move us
you.
along. Madam City Clerk, can we have the next speaker, please?
Phoebe Bresek?
Yes, that's correct. I'm Phoebe Bresek. I live here for a long time. I was a member of the Planning Commission for a number of years, and I've been a residential architect for more than 40. And I'm coming here tonight because one of the things that my community has been talking to, that is my colleagues, is how onerous the process has become to move projects through any town, not just Los Altos. And when we get to this point, we talk about what the goals are. And it seems to me that there are two goals that really made me feel compelled to speak tonight. One is the goal of electrification for the town, which is the state mandate and something we all believe is good for the earth, I think. And the other is historic preservation. And so in terms of electrification, based on the last building code, any new building, residential, will be required to put in photovoltaics and will be required to put in an EV charger. And if the town wants to support the goal of electrification, then putting any kind of fee on that on top of the additional cost which people who are doing that will be required to pay feels antithetical to the goal. The goal is if you want people to electrify, help them do it. The one that struck me most was the water heater, because a gas water heater costs about $700, but we don't want to burn gas. So if you put in a heat pump water heater, it costs about $1,800. And although it's de minimis to say we're going from $75 to $150, it seems to me that that's peanuts. And it would make sense to hold the line there and say, this is what it costs. And if you want to put an electric water heater, there'll be no permit fee. Because what I have found with my clients is if you make the process onerous and expensive enough, they will do it without a permit. And a water heater would be a perfect example because no one would know what was going on. All you need is a contractor who's willing to commit to do it with you. As for the preservation of historic resources, getting on the historic resource inventory to pay for that, where in fact what it does, it puts a giant stick against you instead of a carrot. Because once you're on the inventory, then you're subject to the requirements of being a historic property. Most people don't want to be on it. And so if you choose to do it and you pay money for it, to me it's insult on injury. What we want is people to feel like there is a carrot. If you have a historic property, whether it's on the inventory and low level or rises to the level of landmark or Mills Act, we should make it easy for those people to do it with minimum fees because we want them to do it. A house that I adored in my neighborhood was trashed. They just tore it down. And when I went by, it was gone. Literally my mouth dropped. I knew the people who lived there before. I was sorry when they moved. I'm sorry that house is gone. It was a joy to the neighborhood. Maybe you guys could look at this as a goal-oriented thing and say, if what we want is to preserve houses that have historic value, and if we want people to follow the electrification, let's make it easy. Let's make the fees small.
Thank you for the comment. Any more public speakers?
No.
Okay, then I'd like to ask staff to give a presentation.
And I'm going to have our consultant from Matrix Consulting Group, Courtney Ramos, step to the lectern, and I will share the brief presentation that discusses the item. It should, yep, there we go. All right, so this is in a PDF format, so it's going to look a little bit smaller.
All right, well, good evening, everyone. My name is Courtney Ramos. I'm here with Matrix Consulting Group. Can you hear me?
On here, yeah.
Do I just need to be closer? Okay.
You can raise the lectern if that'll make it easier. There's a button on the side.
I feel like that might be too complicated. I can adjust the mic. You can hear me, though? Okay. Now we're getting fancy. Good evening. My name is Courtney Ramos. I'm from Matrix Consulting Group, and I'm here tonight to talk to you about the results of the development fee study that we have conducted. Really, what we want to talk about tonight highlights, a background of why we do these studies, talk about the methodology, how did we arrive at the results, giving you an overview, really high level of what those results were, talking about the key outcomes, and then obviously has already kind of been discussed already in public comment, but some fee considerations of how and where and why we want to set those fees. So a little bit of background. The city has never conducted an external evaluation of its development fees. There have been a lot of internal evaluations of those fees, but someone like myself from the outside has never kind of come in and led the city through that process. It is a best practice to do something of this nature about every 3 to 5 years. We want to make sure that changes in the code, changes in technology, things like that are all captured. Organizational shifts, how we provide our services are captured, which is why it's a best practice. Through this study, we looked at development services, and so for our purposes, that means building, planning, and land development or engineering. And we also conducted a comparative survey. So we did kind of we didn't benchmark every single fee, but we did do benchmarking of other jurisdictions in the area for each department. So our objectives with this study kind of start with streamlining the fee schedule. So taking a look at it, are there items on there that we don't need anymore? Not a relevant example to development services, but a common example would be still seeing microfiche fees on a city clerk's fee schedule. We don't have microfiche anymore, so removing those types of things. So kind of going in and looking at the structure and saying, what is it that we need? What are the services that we're providing, and are those reflected on the fee schedule? And not just are they reflected, but are they reflected in the manner in which we provide those services? So kind of taking a look at that, making sure that we can consolidate or expand as needed. Then once we have that structure set up, it's working with staff to talk about how much time it takes for these processes. Looking at the staff involved from start to finish, from the minute that we submit that application to the moment that we stamp the approval or provide the final sign-off, do those inspections. We then look at fully burdened hourly rates associated with staff. So we want to take a look at both the direct and indirect costs associated with the staff who are providing those services. Again, we conduct that comparative survey. Obviously people in the community, you up here on the lectern, all want to know what other jurisdictions charge to provide those services. Most importantly, with these studies, we want to make sure that we're complying with Prop 218 and 26, which say that we can't charge more for the service than it costs to provide that service. So what this study does is it lets us know what that ceiling is. It lets us know, in order to be justifiable and in compliance, this is the maximum allowable under the law. And then the result of this is an updated fee study or an updated fee schedule, where we can look at what are those services that we're providing, and what's the amount that we want to charge for those services. So cost of service is a really complicated methodology. It's rate times time equals cost. But there's nuances in that. So when we look at the time estimates that I talked about, what we want to do is we want to look at the average time it takes to process. We don't want to look at the perfect application where they come in, which usually rarely happens, where everything is, all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. But we also don't want to look at, the person who needs us to hold their hand through the entire process. We want to say, on average, how long does it take for each one of the services that we provide for us to go through from start to finish of that process? So understanding which staff are involved in that process and at what point, and how much time on average does it take. And then when we look at those fully burdened hourly rates, it's not just the salaries and benefits of the staff who are providing that service. We also want to make sure that we're accounting for available hours. We get vacation and holiday. We also want to make sure that we're accounting for citywide overhead in that, especially if you look at planning, they have a lot of agenda items that come up. So there's support from the city clerk, there's support from city council, there's finance that is processing all those permit transactions. So kind of, again, just saying, what is the total cost to the city to provide those services? And then what that does ultimately is it gives us that maximum justifiable cost of service, tells us what the ceiling is that we can charge for that. So super high level, when we look at building, planning, and engineering and the fee-related services that are provided, there's roughly a $1.8 million subsidy for those services, with obviously building being highest, planning right there in second, and engineering in third. When we look at the cost recovery percentages, so building at 79%, typically we see anywhere between 80 and 100% cost recovery for those types of services. For planning, at 34%, we actually usually see it somewhere between 50 and 80% cost recovery. And with engineering at 57%, again, it's at that 80 to 100%. So for all three of these, we're at just below or quite a bit below what we see typically for cost recovery. And again, just for fee-based services, so not the entire department, as obviously planning or engineering might provide services that are non-fee related. So some key outcomes of this study. We created flat fees for simple and frequent permits. These aren't so much new permits or applications, but what we did is a lot of things were set based on valuation. And what we did is we created a flat fee. So rather than your fee varying based on the valuation of the project, we established flat fees for this, saying that essentially the value of your project is not indicative of the level of service or the type of service that we need to provide for that. So we created flat fees for those. We reevaluated the percentages for engineering, making sure that the improvement inspections and the utility cuts, that they were appropriately proportioned for those services. Obviously, as you've heard, there's been the creation of historic permits and designations, services that are currently being provided for which there are no fees currently. We updated the technology fee in order to account for current components and costs. associated with the permitting system, various tablets or, things that we need in the field in order to be able to provide the services that we're providing. And then we created a general plan maintenance fee, which helps capture long-range planning efforts. It's a pretty common fee that we see in other jurisdictions, and basically just helps offset some of that cost that would be associated by new development or new projects that would come in. So you have this report, you have these maximum justifiable fees, and now we have to think about how do we set these fees? At what level do we set those fees? And so the first thing to kind of think about is where does that service kind of fall in a benefit continuum to the community? So when we look at certain services like zoning and site approvals or building plans, those are primarily funded by user fees and for the most part have a singular benefit primarily to the person who's pulling that application or that permit. When we look at things like fire prevention and recreation, there's a mixture of user fees and taxes or other funding sources because it's not only benefiting the user, but also benefits the community as the whole. And then when you look all the way at the other end of that, we have things like police or fire suppression or street maintenance, and those are primarily funded by taxes because it has more of that community benefit associated with that. So that's kind of the first way to look at, where and how you want to, your philosophy associated with setting those fees. And then finally, the last kind of set to look at, obviously if we have a fee and we're showing that it's more than 100% cost recovery, by law, we have to reduce it. So it can't be more than 100% cost recovery. If there are any fees that are associated with state or local ordinances, those should remain unchanged. Even in future years if we're going to do a CPI update or anything like that, those need to stay the same. If they're ordinance-based or code-based, then the only way to change that would be to change your ordinance or your code. The other thing to think about is obviously anytime we set a fee at less than 100% cost recovery, it means that we're choosing to subsidize that. And there are other funding sources that are going to offset the cost associated with that. And there's a lot of good reasons, some of which you've I'm sure heard tonight, of why we might want to consider less than cost recovery or subsidization. And the two main reasons are to ensure compliance and so that we don't serve as a barrier of entry to the process or to the system. And so if we're encouraging compliance, common examples of that are setting water heater permits below cost recovery, fire prevention permits, other things where what we want to do is we want you to come in and pull that permit. And so because of that, because we're trying to encourage that behavior, we're going to set that fee lower than cost recovery. Another thing would be, again, not wanting to serve as a barrier to entry, so something like an appeal fee. If we looked at obviously all the staff time and effort that goes into something like that, it can be quite expensive. However, what we don't want to do is limit the ability of the community or a resident to be able to come in and be a participant in the process. And so with that, I think I can turn it over and see if you guys have any questions for me or that.
Councilmember?
Thank you very much. Clear presentation and clear report. I appreciate that. So you talked about, and you had it in the report too, where you showed where fees typically were relative to total cost across, I guess, a national perspective. They were 80 to 100%, and in one category it was lower, 50 to 70 or whatever it was. So what are the reasons then that fees tend to be below the total cost?
So I think, building tends, like I said, tends to be in that 80 to 100% range.
Mm-hmm.
I think why you would see something lower than that is we're trying to encourage behaviors. So a water heater is a good example. In much larger jurisdictions, if we're trying to, not to say that you couldn't do it here in Los Altos, but we really want to build up development on the east side. So what we do is we subsidize permits over there because we want to promote growth in that area. So that's another reason why we might see less than 100% cost recovery, because again, we're trying to promote a desired behavior. And sometimes that's, I just want you to be in compliance with the building code, and so I'm going to set it lower so that from a safety perspective, and other times it's more, economic development related, in that I want you to, I'm trying to build something up over here, and so to incentivize you, I'm going to subsidize that fee.
Right. So those are all sort of goal-driven decisions. I
Yes.
mean, if you look at Los Altos today, it's not necessarily goal-driven, just inadvertent inattention or whatever you want to call it. So, so it sounds like jurisdictions are not generally going to be at 100% across the board between advertent and inadvertent decisions around cost recovery. Is that correct?
That is correct. And I would say too that, comparing yourself to any other jurisdiction, when you look at their fee schedule, that's not always their 100% cost, right? It's what
Right.
they've chosen, and they have a different council makeup, who have different political ideals, and again, different policy considerations, and different goals for their community. And so I think, certainly one of the key things whenever we make decisions for subsidization, I think it's really important to document that and put that out there so that we can revisit those assumptions, because sometimes we're really trying to promote one thing, and then, things move so quickly, a couple years later, we don't need to promote that anymore. And so rather than carrying forward that subsidization, being able to revisit those types of policy decisions is really important.
Right. And one other quick thing, it was apparent more so in the report than in your presentation that that comparing to jurisdiction to jurisdiction, maybe apples to oranges or maybe oranges to tangerines, a little closer, could you please explain why a jurisdiction to jurisdiction comparison may not be the best comparison to make?
Sure. So I think some easy things to think about are the way that you provide services, right? If you've got in-house staff versus somebody else who has contract staff, that means that their cost per service could be less. So even if you were both at 100, showing 100% cost, your cost might be more because you have full-time staff versus somebody else who's able to contract that out at a lower rate. The other thing, though, is that what we found, and certainly in a lot of the smaller jurisdictions, is when somebody last looked at and evaluated their fees. So, because again, what you see on somebody's fee schedule is not their full cost. It's what they've chosen to charge, and it isn't always a cognitive choice from the perspective that they don't always know that that's not the full cost of service. So I think that's an important thing to think about when we're looking at comparing ourselves to other jurisdictions is when did they last update their fee study? And when did they last update their fees? Because some jurisdictions, too, will apply an annual factor, and they'll increase it to kind of maintain a set level of cost recovery, whereas other jurisdictions will just kind of set it and forget it. And then 5 years later, we'll come back. And so I think that's another important factor when viewing that comparative information.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm done, Mayor.
Vice Mayor?
In your work with other jurisdictions, or perhaps in your reviewing other jurisdictions for comparables, what did you find about fee waivers? Because I'm particularly interested in setting a good government policy around fees, and also incentivizing behaviors that lead toward city goals without necessarily creating a fee structure that has to be changed constantly when we change our goals. So I would like to hear your opinion on the use of waivers for incentivizing certain behaviors.
So we've seen a lot of waivers. I think when you're looking to broadly apply subsidization, I think you put it in your fee schedule, like a water heater. I'll just use that as the example, right? So we might subsidize that because we're going to give that subsidy to everybody. Versus, I think a waiver is more generally used when we're trying to help out a certain part of the community or for specific areas of permitting or application.
Let me give you a specific example then, because we're talking about water heaters. I like the idea of keeping the fee in place that is recommended and providing a waiver to people that are doing heat pumps.
Mm-hmm.
We may decide 3 years from now that we no longer need to provide the waiver for people doing heat pumps. A lot easier to just lift that fee waiver than it is to change the fee schedule.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And you have some options for that. So again, we can apply it broadly and just say anybody. We can put limits on it. So you could say up to X number of applications a year. I think it depends on your goal with that policy and with that waiver and what you're trying to accomplish. But we have seen stuff like that We've also seen, obviously, you might have somebody, I'll kind of make up an example based on what we've heard earlier tonight. So maybe you've got historic preservation, but maybe that person, if they've owned that home for a really long time, maybe they're on retirement or something like that. You could also tie waivers to an economic status and say that if so if we look at that kind of barometer and say, if you meet a certain threshold or you don't meet a certain threshold, we will provide waivers to these applications in order to, again, lessen the barrier to that process.
Thank you. Thank you, Vice Mayor. I'm going to go next because I have a follow-up question directly related to that. Substantively or legally, and I realize this may be a question for staff, not necessarily for you, but is there a difference between a fee waiver versus setting a fee at zero? Is there any kind of a legal implication to that? And is there any kind of a future consequence of doing one or the other, or are these simply interchangeable?
You want me to cover? I'm the one that has brought this up several times. We're talking about fee waivers for certain permits that could trigger prevailing wage. It becomes a subsidy under the labor code, paid for in part or in whole with public monies. So if you give a waiver of permit fees or you reduce the fees and it can trigger prevailing wage. And so we have, it came up like with ADU permits and some stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So it really is, it's a prevailing wage issue. So what we do is we don't waive the fees. If the council wants as a policy, we will set ADU permits or X permit at zero. So then we don't waive it, we don't charge it, we don't waive it, and we don't trigger the prevailing wage.
Okay, thank you. So I think I got down lower into the weeds than we needed for this meeting, but that's useful to me. Thank you. Any Councilmember?
Okay, thank you so much for your presentation. I just need to understand, because I think we're saying that there's a new permit fee for water heaters, but yet it's we already have established, the city already does issue water heater permits, but those have always been calculated based on valuation. But now but yet within the same paragraph, we're saying the permit is new. Help me understand why you say that when we already have permit fees.
I think that it's a new structure of it. So it's because you're right. Right now, it depends on the value of your water heater, right? So if you get a super basic model, you're going to pay a different fee than if you get the top of the line water heater. But the level of service provided by the city to inspect and kind of sign off on that water heater doesn't matter whether you have the basic model or the high-end model. So it is shown as a new fee because the item doesn't exist as a standalone fee on your schedule, but it is a service that you are currently providing. But
Right.
but there is no set fee for it in the way that we're proposing that there be a set amount for that service.
So wouldn't it be fair to keep it the way we currently do it, because it's based on valuation of how much it's costing, instead of giving a flat rate fee of one
Well, but then
cent?
I'm saying that if you buy the cheaper one, it's going to cost you less, even though I'm going to spend the same amount of time inspecting it. So basically, because I can afford, or I chose to get the higher level water heater, I'm going to pay more, even though I'm getting the same level of service as somebody who gets a lower value.
Okay, because I
water
thought I saw the fee schedule and it said 0 to this amount was this fee. So I think and then those who exceed the 1,000 was another fee. So it was clear on valuation. So the other question I had was, the planning division already has a handout titled Review Process and Submittal Requirements Alterations to Historic Properties. The document lists 3 types of reviews, not just the 2 that was referenced in the staff response. So I needed to understand at what level these would continue to be without costs, and which are proposed to be new fees, because we say administrative fee, advisory review fee, and historical alteration permit. So I just needed to understand why we would be imposing such a large fee when, like, some of these, the work is done by the applicant, like when they do a HRE. It's presented by the professional that the homeowner pays for. So it's not really our staff doing it. It's the homeowner that does all the work to submit it. So I just needed to understand these categories and how will we be charging for it. Like, what does the $7,172 apply to specifically?
So I'm going to jump in here. So staff does spend an exponential amount of time on all historic permits and evaluation at the administrative level, the advisory level, and as also an actual action taken by the Historic Commission. That means anything from staff report and presentation to the commission, or having to actually work with the historic preservation specialist or architect, whoever is hired, in order to be able to verify what is actually being produced in their historic documents in order to be able to actually make that alteration or modification. It's more than a couple of hours. It ends up generally being well into, I think, Courtney might have the estimate that we might have given for our average, because there's some that take a lot longer than others. And there's the trigger of what's been in our municipal code is just our historic preservation ordinance. So that's the staff level that has to be done in any review. If we were able to just have this all farmed out to a consultant, a report was furnished, we wouldn't have the need for a historic commission. We would just be then taking a self-certification at that point. And that's definitely not in compliance with the historic preservation ordinance. That's not in compliance with the local government regulations that are as oftenly referred to by the community. It's also not in line with CEQA. So all of those things require us to do a review of any type of alteration, modification, or improvement to a historic resource.
So are you saying that if there's a proposed fee for historic alteration, that would apply only to those of landmark status?
So anything that requires the three fees that were identified are three fees that we essentially have remained silent on ever since this ordinance became operative, which has been several decades. So we have essentially, without acknowledging it, been doing a subsidy for any type of work that's ever occurred with a historic resource, whether or not it's an alteration or the identification and designation of a resource.
So you're saying that as well, then it's any home that's on the HRI list, and then
so there's components of our preservation ordinance that it just depends. So if someone's altering it, there's components of that. If it's just an identification onto the inventory, that's something that we kind of just do as a part of an overhaul of the HRI. So there's different trigger points. So an alteration is actually a modification of an identified resource.
So even for advisory reviews, you're saying that it costs a lot of money for us to do that now, which in the past we used to waive?
That's correct. We have waived it traditionally without actually acknowledging that it's been a waiver. We just have remained silent on it and actually not done anything with it. We should be setting it as a fee, and now whether or not that's a policy decision of the council to set it below the maximum allowed threshold under law, that's a policy decision. However, in order for us to be able to be consistent with our ordinance, and when we are issuing permits, it's not a good look for auditing purposes is to say, well, but where's the fees that's been collected with this? We don't have any documentation that says all historic evaluations, reviews will be waived. That's not in the ordinance, and that's not in any fee resolution of the city.
Okay, so my next question, Courtney, is because you were talking about that it's not good to rely on benchmarks with other jurisdictions, but all these historic fees in comparison to all these cities that were just presented to us tonight this is just substantially higher, and I find it surprising that you're saying that they're subsidizing. Where do the fees come when like ADU permits are zero? Where do the fees come to subsidize that? Oh, maybe staff should be answering that.
Well, when you choose to subsidize a fee, you're using other resources,
Right.
primarily tax dollars. That's your primary funding
Right.
source. So if you are not charging the full cost of the service, then tax dollars are offsetting that. That's probably the primary source of that revenue. There might, depending on other things, there might be some grant funding, but the primary source of that would be tax revenue. I would say that
From our general fund then?
yes, from the general fund. When you have the comparison, what I would say is, again, that's not what their full cost to provide that service is. An appeal fee is a really good example of that. You look at everybody's appeal fees, that is in no way indicative of what it's costing them to actually go through that appeal process. It's what they've chosen to set that fee at. So while that is a subsidized fee, and you could certainly look at that and use that as your barometer to say we want to be in line with everybody else, there's nothing wrong with that. But it's understanding what that level of subsidy is for you, because that is not indicative of what their full cost is. So again, that $7,000, that's the ceiling. You by no means have to set your fee at the ceiling. And like I said, you could choose to set it. You could say, hey, we want to be right down the middle with everybody else, and kind of what is that average, and peg it at that. But just again, understanding what then that subsidy means. And also then looking at how many of those applications do you have a year? What is that impact then to those other general fund dollars that are subsidizing that cost?
And I do just want to add, though, something, since we're talking about comparison agencies and in regards to, obviously, the chart that was provided by Mr. Bear. Palo Alto, for example, as identified on page 33 of the attached PDF or page 31 of the matrix report. Palo Alto, for example, the last fee study that they conducted was in 2013. So their fee that has been established has not been revisited in over a decade. They would also not be an apples and oranges type of an organization, as we do not use it for a peer cities analysis when we look at salaries, for example, of the city. For example, they have over 1,000 employees. They also own public utilities. So they're able to subsidize in a different kind of metrics than we would be able to. Additionally, Los Gatos, the last time that they actually did a comprehensive study update was in 2019. And Campbell, it's not applicable. We do not have the data from them. So that obviously would mean that we might not have been able to find it during the actual comparison analysis that was conducted. For example, if we were to look up Mountain View, their last fee study was in 2018. I can say is that Mountain View has for a long time talked about redoing their fee schedule. However, it's been more of a political thing that has not been wanted to be touched in the recent years. And that's why they do see essentially heavy subsidies of a lot of their permit fees. Now that's different from impact fees, which is what is not included in this portion of the matrix study. That would be something that's separate, where a lot of the jurisdictions focus in on impact fees and not cost for service. And so that's where we are looking at right now, is something that has not been evaluated in several years.
Then the other thing I had was the home occupation fee. How do we determine a home is suitable to run a home business, and what does our staff do for the, regarding the 461? A lot of this, okay, I'll let you answer that, and then I'll have another question after that.
Well, I'll defer to staff on what the specific regulations are specific to the home occupation.
So the home occupation application and process really mirrors what a zoning verification looks like, is we have to verify that it is allowed in the zone. We then also have to work with individual, essentially sole proprietors that are doing their own type of establishment, but it's all contained within their single family or their residential structure. And so with that, we also then have to work with them almost as it's essentially like facilitating the business license administration component of it, that we have to then work with them to talk about how their actual business operation or enterprise actually is allowed or what is not allowed, in order to make sure that it is not an impact in the residential atmosphere of the community, where they are supposed to be passive ancillary uses, and you're not supposed to be able to identify them as a business enterprise in the residential zone. So there's actually quite a bit of kind of handholding and everything through the process, and it's an iterative process to be able to get the business scope and narrative. So that's kind of the loose kind of explanation of what it actually entails to actually do a home occupation permit and the review with those that are applying for them.
But then how do we ensure that people that are doing business aren't hanging their license using an office address somewhere else and still having that home office? So in essence, many people have home occupation businesses, but just hang their license somewhere else. How do we make sure that, is there any?
So home-based occupations is a little bit different than just having your kind of your home office. It's really involved is when there's some people that actually do hair out of their home, but they're limited to a threshold of, let's say, off the top of my head, I believe it's 8. It could be a little bit less than that, where they're not allowed to have more than 8 different essentially visits or trips to the home, in order to make sure that it looks like a passive use. So you're not essentially creating a parking lot in front of your home so that you have clients coming and going. There's also a limitation on delivery service for the actual function of what is getting delivered on site. So even just from those things that I just identified, there's a lot in the process of actually permitting and overseeing home-based occupations for all the jurisdictions. But let's say if someone was an attorney and decided to take their work home with them for the night to do some essentially reviews at their desk at home, that's not going to count as that. If they were to, however, say, oh, during COVID, I'm closing my brick and mortar establishment in downtown Los Altos, and I'll just see my, my estate planning clients at my dinner table. Ideally, we would want that to be obviously permitted as a home-based occupation, and then move from there. So that's kind of a little bit of what we would do, and obviously code enforcement would have to be involved if we did get a complaint saying, hey, there's a bunch of deliveries, and we would have to look into that.
Do we even have numbers to back these? Because how many home occupation permit requests do we get? And has anyone ever been denied a home occupation permit?
So May will be my 2 years here. We have had to deny home-based occupations because they are not an allowed type of enterprise in a residential structure. So there is a limitation on home occupations. I do not know what the number is. I'd have to return to council with that to see how many we currently have. They are a lot of times essentially a stepping stone for certain enterprises. So like micro enterprises that, do like home meal prep, for example. A lot of times they kind of do that for a certain little amount of time, and then they start using outside facilities for those same types of services, but they need a bigger space for it, and they can't just do it out of their home kitchen anymore. So there's certain components like that. So it's either kind of people phasing in or phasing out. Especially if people are kind of heading out of into retirement. We do see sometimes people, again, closing brick and mortar, but then still having clients that they need to kind of close up their books because of the legal requirements of their license.
Okay, I'm going to go back to a historic, because I realized I missed something after Mr. Bear spoke, and some concerns that was raised is that regarding the historic alteration permit, for example, at what point do people need to understand when those are needed? Like, if they are, like I asked, if they are doing a small alteration, like to change out windows, at that point, are they?
So
they-
forgive me, Councilmember, you've had the floor for about 15 minutes, and this question is about, that you're asking right now is, when does someone need to know that this is something that that this is a fee they would incur? But the issue before us really is, what is it costing the city in order to administer these various things for which we issue permits, and are those fees appropriate? The question of whether someone knows that this is a fee that would apply or not, I think is beyond the scope of what we're trying to look at today.
No, it's part of the scope because we're establishing the fees. If it's going to be for every little thing that the person has to pull and have that fee be established, then it is something that we need to understand, because it is something that may be making it more burdensome. If it's unclear for us now and we're imposing these fees, we need to better understand them. This is our time to do it.
Carry on.
So for the specific example of a window replacement, like for like, you're not changing materials, you're not changing size. We would not require that, but that would need to be, again, a conversation with the planning department in order to be able to verify that. The historic preservation ordinance, and as it reads, is a historic alteration permit is required in order to alter, demolish, remove, relocate, or change. But we wouldn't consider the replacement of a like-for-like window in the same location, same materials, same size as a change. It's just, I mean, some people are going to just break a window. And also so there's also a component as to why historic preservation ordinances are not really held in zoning and often held in the building code. So this is in our chapter or title for building and construction. And that's because there is the historic California building code that you actually employ. So if, for example, someone ricocheted something in the kitchen and it busted one of the lead glass panels of a historic window, any historic property owner should be calling someone that specializes in that to essentially pop that off of its track and then just actually replace that pane. That's actually how you would do that. That wouldn't even trigger a building permit at that point. So it is very different in regards to exactly what you do. The example that was given from the speaker is that when you're putting a new pervious or impervious surface that was previously not there, that is something that then requires us to make sure that you're not triggering essentially a significant adverse change to a historic resource. And that's what was done for Mr. Bear's example of the front yard landscaping and pervious and impervious surfaces.
Okay, so I guess my concern is then, if you're saying that if someone's repairing things and maintaining their home, that's not going to trigger that permit need for 7,142.72.
That's correct. The issue is, though, is that we have recently even had someone that demoed a historic detached garage down to one flank wall. They were not allowed to. There was conditions of approval. So we then did need to require them, and it required quite a bit of research as well as reopening the entire planning file in order to be able to make sure that what was built back was in keeping with the historic preservation ordinance. That was recently last year fully subsidized by the city.
Okay. So then landscape updates and stuff like that would not trigger. Got it. Okay. I guess my concern then as well, and to get clarification, is when we have to pull permits that are something that normal homeowners are already doing. We're not creating a fee that is just going to be applied to someone who owns a historic home, but yet it would be so much more different than something that normal homeowners do. So we want to be consistent in how we, so my question is, how do we put, when someone's required to pull a permit, it's not differentiated than one that a regular homeowner would have to pull. And that's what my understanding or clarification would be.
So as it relates to historic alteration permits and anything that would be either administrative, advisory, or something that goes fully for a commission issuance of a permit, it is different, and it is different because of what the historic preservation ordinance itself is established to protect. And that's what we're supposed to be verifying. Mills Act contracts are established in order to be able to provide the Mills Act property tax abatement mechanism for individual residential properties. So it is different, as discussed by Councilmember Daley, is those properties are seeing a 40 to 60% reduction from the actual market rate of what property taxes would be paid if they hadn't entered into a Mills Act contract. That is made for by a swap out of at a minimum 10-year schedule of improvements that are to be made from that on that property. So these are for certain things that would be an example of we did just do a Mills Act contract last year that has their 10-year forecast of what they're going to do with identified materials, what they're going to do. That was all baked in. We wouldn't obviously reinvent the wheel and ask them to come and get an alteration permit for something if that was already approved. However, there's some folks that are saying, oh, you know what, I actually realized, with looking through this, I have a historic preservation officer that showed me that actually someone eliminated that dormer on the upper story. I'd like to return that back to how it was. Or, oh, actually we just figured out we enclosed the veranda of our home. We'd like to open it back up to open space and open air. So there's some people that aren't going to identify that on a Mills Act contract schedule that would have to do that as a subsequent action. But if they're able to essentially vest in their schedule under the Mills Act contract for the 10 years, they wouldn't need to go back through other than just a staff level administrative. All right, just show me what materials you're going to do when you come to pull your building permit if it requires one, and then we're fine.
That's great. Thank you for that clarification on that, because that Mills Act contract covers everything. But those who are on HRI, that would be different, correct? Because people who are HRI on the HRI list, there's no contract for them. And so everything they do then would have to require this historic alteration permit, correct?
Correct, but that's also one of the things, though, is to keep in mind. You can be on the HRI, you would be a landmark and on the HRI. Those two are essentially in tandem. However, you do not have to have a Mills Act contract and be a landmark. You could be a landmark and not have a Mills Act contract because you don't want to have to specify to the city when you're going to do what you're going to do. The benefit of doing a Mills Act would be the property tax abatement under what is allowed by law, and then you would be able to essentially vest a 10-year schedule of the known improvements that would be essentially executed on your historic resource.
Right. Okay. But then I guess making sure that people who are HRI listed need to understand that because they might have to take out more than one historic permit if they continue to make those changes that they would be required. And I think that's why it was important for me to understand that it might be multiple permits for people on HRI.
Correct. However, though, there is the component, though, that would be where it is a little bit different if you're just on an HRI versus you're a Mills Act landmark property where you're getting a subsidy or a tax abatement.
Right.
There's a difference where if you're just on the HRI, you want to make sure that that's a city action that identified it on the inventory, and something like modifying it, even though it hasn't been designated as a landmark yet, that there is essentially this alteration permit that says, you need to think really critically about what you're doing to modify this identified resource. Even though it's not a full designation at this time, we need to make sure that you are not modifying and we are losing resources. That is how historic resources are lost, is by not having the essentially administrative or advisory capacity to be able to actually look at what is the historical significance of a structure or property.
And also, just because people place a request to get off the HRI list, they don't essentially get off.
That is correct. We would also obviously have to verify. I have had to previously look at even from in prior jurisdictions that a consultant recommended it. We really kind of looked at it, and it was really kind of the age factor that it was essentially triggering it, and then also a specific type of architecture. But then looking at it, that then warranted us to be able to grant it being removed. But it's not just I want to request to be off
Right.
of that list. It
Right.
is a specific in-depth analysis that needs to be taken on a property-by-property basis.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yep.
And those are my questions. And I do have a statement later.
Councilmember Flagger?
Thank you, Mayor, and we're both watching the same spider. It's a bitsy. Thank you, Mayor, and I see the time. Thank you, Courtney, for the presentation. As the Councilmember Meadows said, very informative, very clear, well done. You mentioned microfiche. I was having flashbacks to when I worked at the Export-Import Bank in DC doing FOIA requests, which is the equivalent of public records requests, and we had to look at microfiche. I should block that, but that's what came to mind, but thank you. So I'll just ask, I had a few questions, but I'll just ask the primary question for me as I think about policy direction. The ranges you provided, building 80 to 100%, those 3 different ranges, are those averages? And the reason I'm asking is, so for example, if for commercial or multifamily development fees, I want to go 100% for cost recovery there. But for other things, I want 0, right? For values, ensure compliance, encourage compliance, they align with our priorities for different reasons. When I look at those ranges, are those averages where it may be where one is 100% and one is less than 100%, so it averages out to 80 to 100% for the different ranges?
Yeah, so when we talk about that cost recovery, it's looking at building's a good example because usually all of building is fee related, right? As opposed to planning that has advanced planning components to it. So if you had $1 million associated with your building department, then they would generate $1 million in revenue. They would be at 100% cost recovery, right? But if they only generated, $800,000 in revenue, they'd be at 80% cost recovery. So it's really looking at holistically, and again, it is on average, and that's why there's the range, right? Because it fluctuates, because different jurisdictions have different reasons for promoting growth or for subsidization or for all of those different things. As it pertains to residential versus commercial, the way your fee structure is set up, you'd have to give subsidization if you were going to do that through a waiver system, or you would have to create 2 separate schedules, so to speak, for residential, for single-family residential versus like commercial or something like that, in order to comply with the law. Because you can't just arbitrarily say, I'm going to charge 80% less for this category or something like that.
That makes sense. And then, Mr. England, just the last question for you, because this is a study session, or Mr. Zorns, when this comes back, to Courtney's point about really understanding where the trade-off is, or, if we don't do 100% recovery, we're going to have to subsidize. I would really appreciate understanding the impact and where we would identify the funds to cover any subsidization that we would need to do. And obviously, we haven't taken any votes. I don't know where council is. But as I think ahead and giving policy direction on how we structure the fees and what we may seek to do 100% or less, depending on what we want to encourage, I would also want to better understand what that looks like. Especially, an easy example, the electrification related fees. If we were not to do 100% recovery, go to the maximum, where the difference would be made up, where it would come from. That would be helpful.
Yes, Councilmember Flagger. So I think what staff had anticipated tonight would be policy direction. So what council has seen is what 100% cost recovery looks like by category. I think what we had anticipated was a policy discussion on council if there are areas like electrification that council would like to subsidize, waive, or set at a lower rate. But we anticipated the impacts of that would come through working with, in this case, the Environmental Commission, working with them on what they see, what they think, helping them understand the impacts, and then bringing a recommendation back. If there are other areas, historic, we would be happy to bring that back. I think we anticipated the discussion, policy direction being more around that, and then we would bring those impacts back at a later date.
Thank you. That aligns with what I was thinking, so thank you.
I do want to just clarify, I don't want to set false expectations. So if the council does not set essentially the total cost column of everything that's contained in the matrix report, we will not be able to make up the difference elsewhere. Those are the 100% cost recovery. You cannot, as Courtney talked about in the presentation, we cannot set it above any of the total cost thresholds. So there isn't actually a making up the difference anywhere in the fee structure at all. If you want to recapture all of them, you are to set it at what is in the middle column, which is the total cost. We can't go above that. So if we go below any of those, you already are now going down to the average range, which is what we have been discussing.
And I think that's understood.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, thank you. So I list the questions. I'm only going to ask one of them, just out of respect for you and my colleagues, given the time.
It's a short
If the council went forward with adopting a new fee schedule, whatever that new fee schedule may be, a proposal was also made to direct staff to include in the ordinance or resolution an annual increase, and it was suggested to either use cost of living or a consumer price index. And the consumer price index made sense to me. COLA did not, but I'm curious what as an expert, what your opinion is, what would be the argument to use COLA over CPI?
So usually COLA is more tied to, so the bulk of the cost associated with providing, application services, inspections is staff cost. It's salary and benefits. So tying it to COLA more closely ties it to your specific cost increases. So if staff are getting 3% every year, or even if you happen to be in the position where you had held off on giving increases, and all of a sudden now you're making up for that. We saw that, but certainly a couple of years ago, where a lot of jurisdictions had made concessions, so they had kind of frozen salaries, and then we were seeing like 5 or 6% annual, and that was actually outpacing CPI. So tying it to COLA more closely ties it to your increases as opposed to the area as a whole. But both are common. I mean, CPI is pretty common. The other thing that we have also seen is to kind of set a limit. So you can say, for example, we are going to tie it to CPI or to COLA, but we are not going to have fees increase by more than X% every year. So, we had like an 8% CPI a couple of years ago. You could have said, we're going to tie it to CPI, but we're not, the max is going to be 5%. So that our fees, so that if we do get in another situation like that where you see inflation, you aren't exponentially putting your fees up. Because the other thing that we want to think about is again, that CPI can fluctuate. And can even sometimes go negatively. And what we don't want to do is get in the position of needing to decrease our fees. So the COLA, then you would either just leave it stagnant or increase it based on what's specific to you and your cost increases.
Okay, thank you very much. And I will echo my colleagues' accolades. When I first read the report, I didn't think it was clear at all, but I was looking at it, I was trying to dive very deep into weeds. Second time I read it, I looked at it from the top level down. I think that it was intended. And I would concur with my colleagues. I think it's a very well-written report, and you did a very good job explaining the issues to us. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So with that, let's go ahead and move into discussion. And I'd like to go ahead and kick us off. What we have in front of us is a nexus report, essentially, that says if you were to go for 100% cost recovery, these are the fees that should be set. The report also identifies that we are right now leaving about $1.9 million annually on the table, and that's a lot of money. That is, about 4% of our annual budget. It seems imprudent that we are proceeding in a way that leaves that much money on the table And I can only imagine that as time goes on, that number and that percentage is going to increase. At the same time, we've all talked about that there are certain policies that we want to promote as a council, and some of those policies are going to include offering incentives to people in order to do certain things, whether it's electrification or agree to a Mills Act contract or any number of other things that we can all think of. My personal belief is that the best way forward is for the council to go ahead and adopt staff's report and recommendation in its entirety. However, to also direct staff to go back to the commissions and bring reports back to us about some of the policies that we're willing to subsidize. And the reason that I think that is the right way to go is because we have the report in front of us saying this is what you have to do to bring cost recovery to 100%. Now, I think the majority of us would like to promote electrification, but it doesn't seem to me like it's a good idea to say, let's not do this increase, let's not do that increase. I think it makes a lot more sense for the Environmental Commission to chew on a little bit, for staff to chew on a little bit, to come back to us in maybe a few months and say, here are some recommendations, here are what some of the neighboring jurisdictions are doing, here are some national trends, and here's what you can expect these type of incentives to actually cost the city. That's the sort of analysis that I think we really need, and anything less than that would be imprudent. If we were just from the dais tonight to say, I don't want to do that increase, I don't want to do that increase, it would not be a comprehensive way of approaching it. And I think that would be a real disservice to the community, especially given that we are taking a very comprehensive approach to bringing our fees in line with what it is actually costing the city to move forward. In terms of whether to go CPI or COLA, before we heard the consultant, I was leaning towards CPI. I think that a good argument was made for COLA. But let me ask, Mr. City Manager, how onerous would it be for staff to do some kind of report to show maybe over the past, well, I was going to say 5 years, but that includes COVID, but could a relatively simple analysis be made as to what the effect would be on fees for CPI versus COLA, looking backward in time, just to give us kind of a better idea of what analysis would be more in line with the actual costs incurred by the city?
Yeah, I don't think it would be difficult to come to kind of like an average percentage going either way. We would probably want to get out of the COVID era, so it would probably only be 2 years, but we could take a short look at what that would be like.
Okay. Then where I stand right now, depending, of course, on what I hear from other council members, I would be in favor of adopting the fee schedule proposed by staff. I know that last night, the Environmental Commission, they actually formed an electrification subcommittee. So they have 3 members who are working on that, including 2 very senior members of that commission. So they're actually geared up and they're ready to go on that. I think they could get a report to us pretty quickly. If we also wanted to ask the Historic Commission or the appropriate staff to take a look at options for encouraging people to go into Mills contracts or otherwise something that's historic related, I would be okay with that. And if there's anything else my colleagues wanted to propose, I'm interested in that as well. So, 80 years. Yeah. So that's where I stand right now.
I want to
The
just
question of-
let the council know, we have already contractually obligated ourselves to $0 fees for ADUs in our housing element. So I can look at that to see what other jurisdictions are doing, but we are legally required to do so.
Yeah, no, I think that settles the issue, yeah. And then in terms of whether it's CPI or COLA, I'd just like to get more information on what the implications would be. So, Vice Mayor?
Mayor, I largely agree with you, particularly about the Environmental Commission reviewing some of these fees as they bear on our electrification goals. I would not support having the History Commission take a look at this. the median home price in Los Altos is about 3.5 million, and property tax in Santa Clara County is 1.42%. So that's about $50,000 a year in property tax. And if you're in the Mills Act, you're going to save $20,000 to $30,000 a year. So that's enough savings. And we need to recover our costs. We need to operate this city with more prudence as to how we spend the tax dollars. And when we choose to make policy decisions like this around fees, I think there's a vast difference between our electrification goals and our climate action plan and the interests of preserving historical assets in the community. I find that we do a pretty good job preserving most historical assets with a couple of notable exceptions. So that's where I stand.
Okay, thank you.
I have a comment. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. So around COLA, CPI, staff recommended CPI. If you want to do an analysis, that's fine. I don't know that it's going to be that different, whether we apply COLA or CPI with some caveats, but I'm open to doing the analysis, whatever my colleagues want. I do want to make, so subsidies tend to be largely invisible to our community. I'll remind my colleagues of the sewer rates that were subsidized for 5 years. There's certain recreation programs, such as a preschool program that has been subsidized for years. We have events and community organizations that we subsidize, sometimes just through in-kind stuff, but police services and whatever. And that's also not explicit, the costs we incur. And there's also, we talked about last meeting, joint services with Los Altos Hills, the senior ride-sharing program where Los Altos Hills is party to that but doesn't pay. So we're subsidizing a whole lot in this community. At 1.9 million a year for the last 3 years, it's over $5 million. We could have done the police station roof. I mean, the fire station roofs. I know we need more than a roof in the PD, but so this is a lot of money, and it's invisible. And when you put a fee, people are up in arms, but the city's been paying for that. So I strongly believe in cost recovery. I know that was kind of a long preamble, but so I would support your proposal, Mayor. I would also support that we look at what we want to incent and consider a very clear framework for what we would, what that incentivication, no, sorry, got that confused with electrification, what that incentive would be. And I think that I am willing to consider some sort of incentive for some aspects potentially of historic preservation, but not just across the board, and not because as the Vice Mayor described, there's already incentives built into the system. So I would like to look at that, and Mayor, as you said, have some in-depth around the areas that we know we're interested in, sustainability, potentially historic, but staff, I think, can do the analysis probably more clearly. But the cost recovery, it's crazy, everything that we subsidize. So we got to make it. And when we do subsidize it, it needs to be clear in whatever forms we develop. There is a 10% or there is a 20% discount to our regular fees, blah, 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 or something, because invisible subsidies do not serve us well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead, you can go first.
Sure.
Yep.
I'll be quick. So Mr. Zorns, I've been flipping through because I want to make sure when we talk about ADUs, and it was one of the questions I had, we have $0 for ADU building permits, and I know that's from the HEU as well. But I thought I saw other fees associated with ADUs. Are you saying that there are no other fees in the fee schedule plan? Like everything is $0 related to the ADU process?
Yeah, unless it's an outside fee, such as like school fees, we can't control those, obviously. Or if for some reason there was a sewer impact fee that was established by Palo Alto that we would have to do as a part of our MOU, since we use them as our service provider for the treatment plant. we're not in control of those. So anything that's a city-regulated ADU fee would be set at $0.
Okay, and that includes the plan check and everything else?
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. I thought I saw something else related to ADUs.
I
that had
think
a
what you
fee.
might have seen previously before a council member is that when I arrived to the city was requiring essentially a pre-permit. We were essentially going through the entitlement process for ADUs without saying it was an entitlement. And we got kind of dinged by that in our housing element. So we had to kind of identify that there was a two-step process, which also resulted in 2 fees. So that might be something that you might have seen maybe in like the HEU language.
But
potentially.
currently it's just the 1 fee and it's
Yeah,
$0.
it is now,
Perfect.
yes.
Okay, and then, and so for me, electrification, obviously, Mayor, and I like your approach. I just want to clarify, your approach is suggesting this comes back to us for us to adopt the fee schedule proposed by staff. And after doing that, we give direction to the commissions. And as soon as they have a report for us on the impact, they would bring it back to us and then we would revisit the fee schedule. Is that the timeline you're looking at? So we would go back to the fee schedule and revisit it based on the reports.
More or less. I think we can actually give some direction tonight. I mean, it sounds like there's a supermajority that is interested in exploring subsidizing or incentivizing electrification.
Okay.
So it seems like that's a direction that's appropriate to give tonight. And we can give direction anytime, right? I mean, an issue could come up that looks appealing to the council to give incentives to the community on any issue, whether we do it at the next meeting or it's a council that does it 10 years from now. The fee schedule can always be revisited for the purpose of examining where it would be appropriate or if it would be appropriate to give incentives for something. So at the next council meeting, if it's on our regular agenda and we're formalizing something, we can do it then, we can give direction tonight, or we can give direction in the future when it becomes a good idea to do so.
And for me, Mayor, and I like your approach. For me, I am more supportive of your approach if, as part of the timeline, we said as soon as the commissions, 1, 2, environmental planning, whichever commissions we ask to do additional work on this, come back to us, we will revisit the fee schedule, because I am not really comfortable adopting the staff's fee schedule where everything is 100%. I appreciate it and I agree we should not be subsidizing that much. I think you said 4% of our budget. But on the other hand, my support, if this were to come back at a future regular meeting, of adopting it as is would be contingent on the fact, at least knowing that soon we'll get a report back where we can look at it again and say, for electrification, for all these other things, let's not do 100% recovery. Let's do this because of X, Y, Z. So
I think that makes all the sense in the world. I mean, if we're going to increase everything up to 100%, then we have an obligation to revisit it as quickly as possible. And I think as quickly as possible is when we have a detailed, responsible report in front of us that gives us the information we need to make an educated decision. So I would give you my word that, for instance, with electrification, as soon as the Environmental Commission and staff are ready to bring it forward, I would plan on putting that on an agenda right away.
great. And if there, and I'll defer to staff on this when they come back, but if there's also anything we can do related to BMRs or affordable housing, I know ADUs are taken care of, but anything in that realm, housing, I would want that on the table as well. So for me, it's electrification, housing, and then on the historic sites, if we're going to ask commissions or staff to do a report, I am fine getting a report for staff on that as well. And then as part of our decision, when this all comes back, we can make the decision then.
Sure. When it comes to historical, I thought the Vice Mayor and Councilmember Meadows made a compelling argument. So that's not something that I would necessarily need to be a direction to staff. But if the majority of the council wanted it to be a direction to staff, then staff should treat that in the appropriate way, whether it's going to a commission or stays with staff or something of that nature.
And I thought I heard Councilmember Meadows, she can correct me, I thought she said she was fine looking at it to an extent, the historic.
I said that I thought that staff could potentially look at the elements and see if there's a framework that could have some justification along some of the aspects.
Right. And that's what
But
I'm
not the
supporting.
commission. I don't think the
Exactly.
commission has that expertise.
I agree.
That makes
So
sense
that's
to me.
where I
Okay.
am with electrification, housing, and then the direction to staff and historic, have that come back for us to make a decision.
Okay. Councilmember, I think you're the last one.
Okay, well, I think differently because I think that the Historic Commission should also have a chance to look at this and provide feedback. Because I think that just like our Environmental Commission is biased or, favorably supports electrification like everyone else, that's fine. But I think that you have a group advocating for, either fee waivers or zero charges. But I think it's important because these people have an appreciation for historic resources and can help us also think about things we fail to understand. Also, there are so few properties that can represent the history of our town. And if we want to have some say in encouraging as well, incentivizing as well, people to take care of their historic properties or homes that are on the HRI, it's important that historic preservation is demonstrated that we value that. And so I think by kind of disregarding our historic commission, but yet valuing another commission is sending a wrong message as well. So I, like you, Councilmember Fliger, am concerned. I'm not just going to accept the fee schedule brought in front of us, because why are we asking for data analysis regarding CPI and COLA? Because we need to understand the data that's before us. And then we can make a decision too. And I think it should go for 5 years or 6 years for that study and not just 2 years. Or we need to understand that even if there is occurrences that happen within our city, how it affects the fees. So we need to get a longer data analysis, a set of data to really know what we are going to be deciding on. So I would say 6 years of data in comparison for the CPI as well as CODA.
Okay, thank you. So staff, do you have direction at this point? Do you need a motion?
We don't need a motion, Mayor. The direction I have is we're going to work with the Environmental Commission on potential fees around electrification or subsidizing fees around electrification. Staff will review fees around historic housing, and we will look at 2 years for COLA versus CPI and bring that back.
Okay.
Wait, even though I spoke, it doesn't mean that everyone disagrees, or are you saying that you don't want any input from the Historic Commission? Is that what I'm hearing then?
I didn't feel they have input on fees. I mean, we know they value the historical homes. We frankly all value the historic homes, unlike some commentary. But the issue in front of us, and therefore them, is not something that's in their jurisdiction. They review something, is it historic? Not. Should they recommend Mills Act or not? It's just not relevant. You can make a somewhat similar argument for Environmental Commission, but I think they have the ability to actually parse into the data and the impact of various policy decisions. So that's why I don't see Historical Commission being policy focused at all.
Well, it's just not Mills Act, it's also homes on HRI.
All right, so I'll look to my colleagues. Are there 3 council members who want to direct staff to bring it to the Historic Commission?
No, but I'll just clarify that we're not picking one commission over the other, because I do think the Environmental Commission has a niche and an expertise here, and we know that. We know them well, and they focus a lot on policy and very familiar with this area. For example, I mentioned housing as another area to explore, and that's not something I'm sending to asking for support to send to the Planning Commission. There's some things I think that should be directed to staff as opposed to the commissions. And I do think the Environmental Commission is different when we're looking at something like this compared to the Planning Commission or the Historic Commission. And we'll defer to staff to figure out who they need to work with, what they need to look at in order to bring the report back to us.
I think it was very well said.
Okay, and then regarding the data analysis, I would like it for longer and not, it would be a minimum of 5 years, minimum of 5 years.
I mean, the problem with a 5-year analysis is that 3 of those years are during COVID. So I don't want to put an onerous burden on staff that will not give useful information.
But that is important information, so people can see that under certain circumstances, how it affects our city. And that is carving out information specific to what data you want. So if you don't be able to utilize data that even has applicable information that we could utilize and learn from, then that's concerning for me.
Councilmember?
Point of clarification, I'm sorry, Mayor. Mr. Zorns or Mr. England, was staff's recommendation CPI or COLA?
CPI.
I thought it was CPI.
I recommended in there CPI, but that's just because of consistency purposes of what we've done historically in the city. I have seen personally the application of COLA. It obviously ebbs and flows with contracts, though, in order to be able to kind of establish that, so you're gonna, sometimes if you do the COLA model, you're gonna, have by contract with an agency association, a sunset of, 5% every year. So it's not going to take into the economic trends. So there's some years you're going to be better off and there's some years you're not. So, but I think what Courtney mentioned during the presentation is you can make also a subsequent like sub-bullet policy decision is to say not to exceed this. So essentially you create your range.
And Mayor, just for further clarification, we're happy to do the work. I don't think the data is going to change what the recommendation is. It would still come back as staff would recommend CPI. Council doesn't have to accept that, of course, but CPI would remain the recommendation.
How much work is the analysis?
It's not too much.
Okay, then if it's not too much to do 5 years, that's fine.
Thank you.
Okay, so with that, I will go ahead and conclude our special meeting. I know staff needs, a minute and a half, 2 minutes or so to switch over from Zoom. So we will take a very short break and go right into our regular meeting. So for those who are watching on YouTube or Facebook or anywhere else that we're being broadcast, you will need to log out of this. There is a link to, there's a different link for the regular meeting, which is coming up in a minute. And if you don't already have that link, of course, it is on the agenda. So with that, we are adjourned.
This is just that minute?
Yes. Right.
Lisa, how come you're always an attendee lately rather than a panelist? Or are you both?
Recording in progress.
Versus finding the email.
Exactly.
Okay.
But Taylor didn't know. I just stayed there.
Okay.
Yeah. I know exactly, right?
I was looking at pictures of the house. Yeah. But congratulations, that's awesome. We're all good.
I'm encouraged by the number of residents in the room.
Encouraged in what way?
That we won't have public comment that goes on forever.
Oh, yeah, no, I don't think we are. You mean about the Ramadan proclamation?
Jordan.
Oh, nah, I mean, we'll have some, but
Organizing, but decided not to show.
I know, it's beyond that.
As long as we keep to the agenda.
Yeah.
Sadly, that's not a foregone conclusion.
It never is. I mean, it could be a very short meeting, right? regular city council meeting of the Los Altos City Council. Looks like it's about 7:45 on Tuesday, March 12th, 2024. I think we are ready to begin, council. Everybody ready? Okay, staff? All right. So, Madam City Clerk, if you could please take roll and establish a quorum.
Councilmember Fliger.
Here.
Councilmember Meadows.
Here.
Councilmember Liang.
Here.
Vice Mayor Daley.
Here.
Mayor Weinberg.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. And I'd like to invite the Vice Mayor to lead the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Next item of business is a report on closed session. We have not had a closed session since our last regular meeting, so there is nothing to report. Next, let's move on to changes to the order of the agenda. And as I mentioned previously, the special item is going to float a little bit. I am planning on giving it after 8 o'clock when we finish whatever agenda item we finish after 8. I plan on giving the proclamation at that point. I believe there's a simulcast right now in the community center, and the people watching over there will be making their way over around 8 o'clock. So are there any other changes to the order of the agenda that anyone would like to propose?
Mayor, could we move item number 11 to a future meeting, please?
Yes, so item 11 isn't quite ready to go. Is that a mayoral decision, or do you need the council's consent?
I believe that's a council decision.
Okay. So, anyone opposed to?
We need a motion.
So
correct?
Okay, do you need a motion, or is direction good enough? Okay. So,
So moved.
second.
Councilmember Fliger.
Yes.
Councilmember Liang.
Yes.
Councilmember Meadows.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Daley.
Yes.
Mayor Weinberg.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Does anyone else want to propose a change to the order of the agenda? Next, I will open the floor for public comments to anyone who would like to make a comment on an item that is not on our agenda tonight. So, Madam City Clerk, do we have any speakers?
We have two speakers.
Okay.
The first speaker is Lynn Emmerich.
Hi, my name's Lynn Emmerich, and I'm here to address the parking near the high school.
Is he saying to speak a little bit closer to the microphone?
Sorry,
Yeah.
I didn't want to be too loud. Thank you. I live on Los Niños Way. I grew up on this street, and I have lived here on and off for 60 years. Parking on the streets north of Jarden has gotten completely out of hand and dangerous. The roads are way too narrow for parked cars that align the street bumper to bumper for at least 3/4 of the way down the street, and also to accommodate traffic moving in two directions to drop off students. These cars stop in the middle of the road to drop off their students, and then many times make a U-turn in the middle of the street, which holds up traffic even more. Meanwhile, students who are walking are dodging cars and weaving in and out of parked cars. This is dangerous. Residents can't back out of their out of their driveways. It's dangerous to back out. You can't see because of the cars on each side, and also there's a car behind you, so you're afraid the car parked behind you you're going to hit that too, so you have to be super careful. The afternoons are also bad because parents block driveways for 20 to 30 minutes waiting for their students because there's no other place for them to pull over and wait. The streets can and should only accommodate moving traffic, which includes students being driven to school. What is particularly frustrating is that the school is directing students to park specifically on our streets as if they own our streets as their personal parking lot without any communication with the residents. Residents have no space to park anywhere near their homes for guests, workers, repair people to park. Many times the visitors need to carry many loads of equipment down from where they finally were able to find a parking place in order to work on the house for which they came. Additionally, mailboxes and trash cans are blocked by parked cars. It was originally communicated to students back in 2019 that as the main parking lot shrunk for the purpose of construction, it would only be temporary for a couple of years. 5 years later, it is permanent. And now the school has grown by over 1,000 students, additional staff, and significantly less parking on campus. It is appreciated that the school finally opened the carve-out around Christmas time on Almond to drop off and pick up students. But there is also plenty of room to drop off and pick up students in the main parking lot, as many other schools do. Almond Avenue is a bigger street than Jardin and originally designed for school traffic. The streets on the south side should accommodate more drop-off and pickup to alleviate some of the chaos on the narrow north sides that was never designed for drop-off, pickup, or this much traffic. There needs to be a meeting with residents, the city council, and the school as soon as possible to come up with a remedy. Residents are now organizing to insist that parking be changed before, but no later than when Jardin is redesigned, and that is finished. I'm almost done. Can I finish?
One more sentence.
On March 6th, David Sauerhoff sent the city council a letter with many signatures addressing the Jardin and parking issues. I'll let my husband finish.
Thank you for your comment.
The next speaker is Michael Emmerich.
Well, I'll at least tell you, my name is Mike Emmerich, and I live on Los Ninos Way. I've lived there for over 22 years, not quite as long as my wife. These signatures represent only a small number of concerned residents for the following issues. Please be aware that the upcoming changes on Jardin directly and negatively affect the surrounding streets to the north. A change needs to be made on Panchita Way, Los Ninos, Distal, Casilla, and Alicia. One or more of the following ways: change the parking on these streets to permit parking for residents only, add no parking for these students during school hours, preferably from 8 to 4 p.m., and to restrict in the school's main parking lot in order to make our streets equitable to other surrounding streets on the east, south, west, and of the high school. Remove all parking on the east, south, and west sides to make equitable for all residents. I want to add that the count that I did recently with my wife, we have only 62 student parking spaces on the main parking lot. We are impacted by 150 students on the north side of Jardin. If you go down our street, Jardin, our Los Ninos is not very big. As my wife pointed out, the problem is it's so narrow, people are making U-turns. People are going into driveways. People are dropping off and they're parking. It's dangerous. When I went on Jardin, most of the parking spaces on Jardin are being used by staff. There's nowhere for the students to go. And I realized that a lot of the students want to, they're trying to make them go by bike or walk. There's 700 students that are eligible to drive at Los Altos High. It's only going to get bigger. We have construction on First Street on Distal Court, and we also are trying to comply with the state as far as affordable housing. It's going to get worse, and I'm tired of it. I urge you all to go out there from 8:15 to 8:40. It's only a short period of time to view this. It's a madhouse. You would not believe the things that go on. Kids are driving fast, parents are driving fast, people are doing U-turns in various places, including Jardin, where it says no U-turns. And any changes that they are making to Jardin are not going to help. This is only a 44-foot street, and they're trying to put in bike lanes, buffer zones, bike lanes. It looks like, a colorful painting. Our friends go out there and they can't even tell, where do I drive? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your comment. Okay, I see we have the usual suspects in the room. If anyone else would like to make a comment on an item not on the agenda, please come forward. No? Okay. Next item of business is our consent calendar. If anyone would like to make public comment on any item on the consent calendar, now is the time to do so. Even if an item does get pulled from the consent calendar, we're not going to take public comment later on when it's discussed. So, Madam City Clerk, do we have any public speakers on the consent calendar?
No.
All right. Then would anyone like to make a motion, or would anyone like to pull anything from consent?
I'd like to pull 4.
Item 4, that is the California Business Roundtable measure.
Yes.
Okay.
Otherwise, I could just make a quick comment and make sure I register how I'm going to vote differently.
If that's all, then why don't we do that?
I just wanted to make sure that, you know, even though it's agendized as a CBRT measure, it is really taking a position to oppose the Taxpayer Accountability Act, which would allow voters to vote on the approval of new taxes. And I think we should have made that clear. So I did want to note that I will not be supporting agenda item 4.
Okay, then we'll vote on agenda item 4 separately. Would anyone else like to move anything off consent?
Mayor, I plan to vote no on one of the items, but I can do that when I get called on for the entire consent calendar.
Okay, we can do it that way.
I don't think you need to
That's-
pull.
Yeah, you
That's
don't
fine.
need to pull.
So like when you say you're going to vote no, are we going towards each one? Because we need to know what other items will be
So if,
different.
when I call the consent calendar, the motion will be to approve. Anyone who vote yes will be assumed to have voted yes on items 1 through 7. However, if a council member before that vote is taken indicates that they want to oppose it, but they don't want to pull the item, then voting yes on the consent calendar will still be recorded as a no vote on the item that they declared they were voting no. So if you vote yes to approve the consent calendar, it's understood that you're doing that with the understanding that you are voting no on item number 4.
Okay.
So Councilmember Flagger, you had an item that you wanted to vote no on?
Yes, I'll be voting no on item number 3.
Okay. Anyone else?
I have a motion. I move we approve the consent calendar.
We have a hand
Mayor.
raised.
Sorry, for item number 2,
Thank you.
the recommendation should read, move to adopt resolution number 2024 blank for the purchase of a flushing truck for the sum not to exceed $710,750.71 from VATCon Inc., who is a Sourcewell contract holder and a cooperative purchasing contract. We had the incorrect name in the recommendation.
So I amend my motion to reflect the change noted by the city manager.
And that will also incorporate the change to the resolution in the Q&A today?
Correct. We'll change it anywhere
With
that
the
it was
correct name.
incorrect.
Okay, so there's a motion.
Second.
Madam City Clerk?
Councilmember Meadows.
Yes.
Councilmember Liang.
So knowing that yes to the others, but no on 4.
No on 4 and yes to 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, and 7.
Yes.
Okay. Councilmember Flagger.
Yes on all the consent calendar items except for item number 3, which I vote no.
No. Okay. Vice Mayor Daley.
Yes.
Mayor Weinberg.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's move on to our first discussion item. That is to introduce and waive first reading of an electronic signatures ordinance. And I will turn the floor over to the staff.
So staff doesn't have a formal presentation regarding this, as this is a very simple ordinance that would just allow the city, when desired and necessary, to execute all of our kind of documents, which would include resolution ordinances and our contracts, to allow for that to all be done electronically. We pretty much do this for a lot of what the city does, but not comprehensively. In order to do it for resolutions and ordinances, you do need to have a local ordinance adopted and not just a standalone electronic signature policy, which is what we currently have for contracts. So this would then allow for it to be applied across the board for everything, if and when needed, for best practices. So there's not really much more than that I could offer other than potential questions from the council.
Councilmember Flagger?
Thank you, Mayor, and thanks, Mr. Zones. I just want to clarify that 2020 electronic signature policy that we adopted, will this supersede that policy, or will that policy still stand in addition to this ordinance?
It will stand in addition.
Okay. Thanks. Do we need both?
So there's a little bit more, I would say, procedural for staff that's in the policy for kind of like how we use it for day-to-day business use. This is really kind of the legal confines to say, if for some reason, we have to have the mayor sign off on resolutions and ordinances, it's not up, it's not getting held up until they can eventually return back to in-person for a wet signature.
Okay, thank you. That's it, Mayor.
Does anyone else have any questions? Vice Mayor?
Ready to make a motion?
Yeah.
Public comment, sorry.
Public comment.
Yeah.
Madam City Clerk?
No.
Again, I don't see the throngs rushing forward, so I will close public comment and move on to deliberation or motion. Vice Mayor?
If there's no deliberation, I'm ready to make a motion.
Okay, please do.
I move that the City Council of the City of Los Altos introduce and waive further reading of an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Los Altos, adding Chapter 2.30, Electronic Signatures, to Title II, Administration and Personnel of the Los Altos Municipal Code, and find that this action is exempt from environmental review pursuant to 15061B3 of the state guidelines implementing the California Environmental Quality Act of 1970.
I'll be glad to second.
Madam City Clerk?
Councilmember Lee Eng,
Yes.
Councilmember Meadows,
Yes.
Councilmember Flagger,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Daley,
Yes.
Mayor Weinberg.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you very much. Okay, I see we still have guests here for the proclamation that are making their way in. Let's go ahead and move to our next agenda item, which is the Cities Association bylaws. And rather than looking to staff, I think there's no staff report, but if our representative to the Cities Association would like to make an introductory remark, I think that would be in order.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to pull a John Maginot. I'll just stand by the staff report. I'm here for questions.
Okay, are there questions for our representative?
I do.
Councilmember Liang.
So it says regarding the draft, we're taking feedback on the draft, but not feedback on the RPLG draft. So is it the draft that goes in, the one that's on the front, that you want that you're saying that we are adopting, and not this one by RPLG?
So just to clarify what's in the packet, so the draft bylaws, that's what we're asking council to review and provide feedback. The memo from RPLG, which is our outside general counsel, summarizes other feedback we have received over the past year from other city councils. And so the memo is provided for two reasons. One, it's to let people know what suggestions have been made already. So if you're thinking about it, it's already on the list of things we're going to consider. And two, it gives council members an idea of the types of feedback we're looking for. So that's the purpose of the RPLG memo. Of course, if there's a comment or feedback from another council that you want to comment on, you can.
Okay, I do. And then also, because my concern was about why the suggestions by RPLG wasn't included in the draft that we have before us. And I like some of the things that was in the RPLG one, so.
And I'll clarify.
Okay.
We have not discussed and or incorporated any of the feedback we've received from councils yet. We're compiling them. And so that memo starts the compilation of all the feedback we have received. So the draft bylaws you're looking at has not incorporated any of the feedback from councils yet.
So I guess my then I would have some edits. And then I guess that was my question. And when you're ready for my suggestions, I'll be glad to share them.
No problem. And as with any other vote or decision by council, I look to the mayor to ensure we have a majority or more supporting these so I can bring them forward.
So what I propose to do is to go through the proposed bylaws section by section. But are there any other questions for Councilmember Flagor? No? Vice Mayor?
Just to clarify, what we are doing is we are giving our colleague the charter to go forward and vote in that body. And
So the request from Councilmember Flagor is authorization from the council to do that. However, we also as a council can give direction to Councilmember Flagor to suggest certain changes.
Right, but we are not voting to approve or not approve this document, right? All we are doing is giving our colleague the feedback and support required to go forth and represent us accurately.
That's correct.
Yeah, okay.
And just to clarify, and any potential edits.
Yes, if there's support for feedback, comments, edits by this council, I will take that back. But as part of the discussion that we will have at the Cities Association board meeting in May, I will have authority, depending on the discussion, to vote on behalf of our city council on the final decision.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay. Madam City Clerk, are there any public comments on this item?
No.
Okay. Then I will turn it over to council. So as I said a moment ago, why don't we go through the document article by article, and when someone has a suggestion or a question or a clarification, just go ahead and pop in, please. So does anyone have any concerns with anything in Article 1? Okay. Article 2 is membership. Article 3 is the Board of Directors. Article 4 is officers. Article 5 is meetings. I do too. So I'm concerned that it appears that the association would move forward with direction, or a yes vote will be considered binding if a yes is indicated by a majority of the members who are present. So you have to have a quorum, and then of that quorum, a majority has to vote yes on something.
Yes.
Okay, so that means that if only 8 members show up and 5 of them vote yes in terms of giving direction, just 1/3 of all the cities essentially is driving the car on that. I have concern about that, and I know if my colleagues do, but I would much prefer that it say that they could proceed with a quorum, but I think that a vote should also require a majority of the members total, not just the members that are present.
So 8 or more.
Yes.
Okay.
Vice Mayor?
Yeah, I agree. I think fundamentally the issue of quorum and what carries a majority should be similarly defined to how we do it for our commissions, which is to say that quorum is a majority of those seated, but it also takes a majority of those seated to affirmatively adopt a motion. That would be my suggestion. And members can vote electronically, right? They don't have to, for the purposes of defining quorum, it's who's there in person. But for the purposes of voting, votes may be executed by Zoom. Is that correct?
Yes, and we allow attendance by Zoom as well.
Then for sure, I think that to advance a motion, it must require a majority of members seated.
And I support the suggestion. I know why it's here. It's because in the past, when it was 100% in person, there were times we needed to take a vote. and not all councils were represented. And so we needed to go with majority of the members present. I do think over the past 2 years, we've had close to full attendance. I don't think this will be an issue going forward. And I think it's a good suggestion, so I'll take that back.
Okay. Does anyone else have any suggestions on Article 5? Councilmember Liang.
Just getting back on that, maybe a supermajority at the minimum, you know what I mean?
We already, I mean,
Okay.
that goes
But
against
I
what
was
I
good.
just said.
Okay, but I was good with that, but I was just, in case they're not gonna go with it, that it shouldn't just be a majority and, just having an alternative choice. The other thing I had a concern regarding meetings is, under notices and meetings. I think that when we do notices, it somehow should request that the postings of the meetings follow the posting requirements of our council meetings, and that the agendas be posted at each city, because our goal is to be transparent and to let people know that we're using their tax dollars to be part of this group, and the work that we're doing there as well. And I think that it should be made public and just posted at all, and also on our website when these meetings occur, just to have a schedule.
So just to respond through the mayor, currently the Cities Association has its own website, and the notices and agendas get posted there. And so all the different member cities should know, and if they don't, I'm happy to announce it at the next meeting, that they have a central website that they can go to and see our notices and see our agendas. I don't support this change. I don't know if you have majority supporting it, but it would just be an unnecessary burden on our limited independent contractor staff to have to figure out how to make sure. I don't want to make a commitment that will be difficult for independent contractors to meet, where we're going to require every member city to post the notice.
Okay, then the other thing is, so it says here under liaison, oh no, next section, sorry. I was going to Article 6.
Any other comments on Article 5? Okay, Article 6. I have some here too, but Councilmember Liang, I'll yield to you.
You can go first, go ahead.
Does anyone else have any comments on Article 6? Councilmember Meadows.
And I'm not sure it fits in here. It's really pertaining to the memo talking about the Legislative Action Committee, and
It would go here. if
Yes.
there's- Yeah.
So I liked the discussion, or agreed with the discussion about a supermajority of legislative positions of the body being important. And maybe my colleagues don't agree with that, but I think, if you have whatever the number, just one over majority for Cities Association to take a position, and we're in the minority, but to me, to represent a regional group, it probably to take a position, it probably should be more than just a simple majority.
And I
agree
can
with that.
respond. So majority, I'll propose it and
Right.
we'll see where the board
Yeah.
votes. I actually don't support that, and obviously Palo Alto and other cities proposed it already too. And we'll see where majority of the board is in May. The concern there are other JPs, we serve on other JPs, and it's simple majority. You're making regional decisions based on simple majority all the time as part of these regional boards. Councilmember Meadows just said maybe simple majority plus one. I think that may be more reasonable. But when we're trying to vote on things, we would have, deadlock, like every time, because we can't get to that supermajority, because it is difficult to get to that supermajority.
But I think were you talking about voting in general or just on the legislative action?
I'm talking about the Legislative
Which is
Action
where a lot of our
Committee.
votes are.
Yeah,
That's where-
and so, for example, if there were a housing-related item and an anti-housing vote one by one, but let's say we get a pro-housing designation, if that is to happen, and we're applying for that, that's rather contradictory. So a regional position has been taken, we're a member of that. I just feel that some of the legislative support is more important than sort of the day-to-day running and operational aspects of the county. I mean, I can go either way, whatever, obviously the majority of the representatives on the cities association, but I think it's important. I think I don't know about my colleagues, but if we end up wearing a hat that we don't support because it's a simple majority, I realize it's harder to get things done then. Yeah.
And I'll add to that too, because it's these controversial items, right? Where the vote is very close. But the flip side of that is it's these controversial items that we actually want to take a position on. So when we go to the Hill, we can say this is the Cities Association's position because they'll pay attention. And so if we leave these controversial items where it will be very close, then we don't have a position by the Cities Association and we can't walk in with our letters and they'll listen to us, right? Because we're saying, and they understand. I mean, they all know it's not necessarily majority. They'll even ask about, well, what about this city? So they understand it's not majority. But I will tell you that on these more controversial issues, it requires most times a simple majority for us to take a position. And we want to take position on these things.
But isn't it more compelling to say we're taking a position as a region and it required a supermajority of the members of the body to actually bring this forward? So this wasn't an 8-7 vote. This required more than just a majority.
Oh, when it's more than a simple majority, we highlight that. It's not as if this prevents us from getting to a unanimous or supermajority. It's just that the threshold is simple majority. And I will tell you, some of the legislators will ask, what was the vote? And we love to be able to say 13 of the 15 or 13 of the 14. So there are times when we do tout it, because obviously it's to our advantage. I am just concerned that, and we'll see where majority is. I know last year this came up before. And there were reasons when we looked at the votes, especially on the housing and these, it was close. And so it made sense to keep it as a simple majority. We're now a JPA, we're revisiting it again. If it's super majority, we'll see. It may just require more lobbying, more education on the part of board members to get to that super majority either way. Because of course, with an election, the composition changes. Personally, I mean, if majority or more I see, at least, and I'm assuming Councilmember Liang may support this as well, I will take this back. I represent you, so that I will basically put it forward as a suggestion from the City Council. But personally, voting tonight on it, I will not support it, but I will represent my council if majority of you want to do it.
So Vice Mayor, Councilmember Liang, do you have comments on this?
Go ahead, Vice Mayor, go first, and I'll go second.
So I serve on that committee.
Yes, you do.
You're welcome.
And I don't have nearly as much experience as my colleague does with that body, but in my limited experience of a few meetings, I can see what she's saying about the challenge to reach that supermajority threshold. And given that, sort of in the sidebar discussions around these letters that the committee may prepare, we're going to convey just how strong the Cities Association may or may not be supporting something. I'd be inclined to defer to her expertise on this and support her position. I support the council member's position that we should be looking for a simple majority.
Councilmember Liang?
I support Councilmember Meadows' position, and I think it's important because lots of times we're a small city and our voice needs to be heard, and many of the small cities feel like we're not being heard. So I think having that in place is important. But I also like the recommendation that was put in. That's why I said the RPLG report. I like that when the association takes that first bullet, when the association takes a position on proposed legislation, it must be clear as to which cities support the proposed legislation, which opposes the legislation, and which are not taking a position on the proposed legislation. If a letter is sent from the association, the letter must indicate this information.
Okay, I have a
like
different
that.
opinion on that, but sticking just on the question of whether we're going to direct the council member to relay that our position is to do a supermajority.
And
Or-
and Mayor, if I may, I want to clarify a point Councilmember Lee Eng made because it's not completely accurate. We heard this last year as well, where the impression is smaller cities vote one way and the larger cities vote another way. We looked at some votes last year, especially on housing and these more, and you have small cities supporting pro-housing legislation, right? But and you have big cities representatives opposing it. So this idea that small cities need a voice, and so that's why it should be supermajority. It actually doesn't pan out when you look at the voting record over the past couple of years. There are small cities that vote on pro-housing bills and feel like their voices are represented. And same thing with larger cities. Palo Alto, they will vote, against housing bills, even though they're considered one of the mid-sized to larger cities. So we do have a voice. Small cities have a voice. We're not all the same, and our views do get represented.
So I have one final comment if I'd make about it. I do think that what Councilmember Liang would address my concerns if each, if it's notated support, didn't support, didn't, abstained or whatever you want to call it, because this is not common in the democracy. Once a body takes a position, you all have to support it. I'm advocating differently here for Cities Association, it's a regional board, that I think it's important for us to be able to point to our position in case it's contradictory to our city position. And we can say, we weren't supportive of this, but we understand that the Cities Association supports it.
Would that type of a statement in a formal a policy position by the association be undermined by a statement that these cities dissented?
It will. Because right now, the way the letters are drafted, it's the Cities Association voted, because it is. Majority represents the voice of the Cities Association. I will say, as someone who has drafted these letters over the years, we always include, you can go back, pull up the letters on the website, we always include, suggestions about how they could make changes, representing the minority voice. Like, we will say, these are areas that members raise concern about. Like, we address it without calling the name of the city at the end of the letter. So this suggestion has been made, as Councilmember Lee Eng said, to have that somewhere reflected the vote. I don't know. I think there's stronger opposition to supermajority, at least based on last year's discussion, than to actually identifying at the end of the letter who voted which way.
Yeah.
I do know that supermajority will never get to it. Like, it's just
So my preference would be not to require the position statement to say who voted yes, who voted no. I think if there's a dissenting city, the city can always send its own letter, and I'm just afraid that it's going to saying that it's going to undermine the position. That's where I stand right now. But Vice Mayor,
I was going to say the same thing. Any given city can write their own letter. And so I do not support, somehow segmenting the body. The body is the body and speaks as the body.
So I think there is not majority support for including the provision that says the policy statement is the position statement is going to say who voted yes, who voted no. I'm unclear on does anyone still support the supermajority versus the simple majority? Okay, so I think you have convinced us.
Thank you. We'll see where the votes are, but
right.
I appreciate this going in, and I'll advocate for this.
Does anyone else have anything on Article 6?
I think you didn't say supermajority. I thought you said majority plus one. Didn't you,
No.
I just wanted
Actually,
your
I
clarification.
think Councilmember Flagger misheard me because I didn't. I may have said it, but I didn't intend to. So sorry.
Okay, because I think the same argument applied for earlier regarding votes. So that's why I would have applied it here as well.
Okay, anything else for Article 6?
I had a simple question. So in Article 6, when we talk about the city managers, the city managers, let's see, right here, lost my page, sorry. The City Managers Association. So how do we get a chance to preview their information prior to, at the same time that you guys on Cities Association get it? Because I guess I don't see it on the website for Cities Association, the information or decisions or their meetings that they have. How do we get that information?
So the president of the board's city manager is that liaison, who is Mr. England, so I'll have him explain his role.
So as the bylaws say, the City Managers Association would act as an advisory committee. So sometimes the association will ask us to weigh in on something or to look at something, or on occasion, they will ask me to relay to the association something we'd like them to look at. But it's an advisory capacity, and we don't have, as a City Managers Association, we don't have public meetings or things like that.
But the information that you weigh in on, so you're saying the City Managers Association is asked to look at things, and they cannot choose to provide a position even though they're not asked?
I think
The
we
example
could.
is the budget,
Yeah.
right?
It's a good example, the budget or going through, the city manager all looked at that. We sat with the executive director. We gave her our feedback to give to the board. The board can choose to accept that or not. That's really up to them. Again, we're just providing advice.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to Article 7, Finances. Okay, Councilmember?
Article 7, it's not in this change that I had, but it was in the RPLG one. I think it's important to clarify what they call the fiscal year. So under item 16.5, under Article 16, on the RPLG report,
Oh, okay, go ahead.
just make sure that when they say an annual fiscal year audit, they clarify, they at least put parens what they consider their fiscal year. So we're all clear on the same,
Okay,
We'll
and just so
start
you
in
know,
Feb.
it is
the
July 1st
yeah,
through June
yeah.
30th.
But I think for public purposes, when they read stuff like
Okay,
this,
granted.
it's important to help people know what we understand as.
So clarify in Article 7 of the bylaws what the fiscal year period is.
As well as 16.5 under the Article 16, yeah. Yeah.
Right, that's the JPA, but okay, I
Okay.
got it.
Okay, then you can do it under here.
Yeah.
Okay,
I
thank
don't
you.
know if there's support for that.
So what exactly is it that you're proposing?
Just to explain what they follow as their fiscal year, so they will determine when their start and finish for their audit session.
I have no problem with it.
I have no objections.
Okay. Anyone else on Article 7? Okay, I do have a couple of concerns. The bylaws require a budget to be adopted by June 15th, and dues paid on June 1. But cities are just getting to their own budgets in May and June, and I suspect most cities don't even adopt their own budgets until after June 15th. Is that going to cause any type of confusion or difficulty? Would it make more sense to maybe kick it back a month for the association? That way the cities have all adopted their budgets and it's clear what they're allocating, where they're allocating it from.
So that's a great point, Mayor. I'll tell you, even though it says here that the final budget should be adopted no later than June, for example, we're doing it in April and we actually send the draft to the city managers in December, worst case January. So they already know what it is when they're doing the city's budget for July 1st. So
As a practical matter, it
works.
shouldn't be a problem.
It does. It actually, but I know what you're saying, and that's something
All
I
right.
could, if there's support, because in reality, we make it
So
way before that.
looking at it on paper, it makes sense, but if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Right, but I
Okay.
will take that back.
That's- I mean,
yeah,
that's-
because
I like Section 3 and I like Section 4. I think Section 4 was probably better titled audit as opposed to accounting. But if there's going to be an audit annually, and there should be an audit annually, does the association need a formal financial policy? And if it does, I wonder if, well, I think that it does, and I think that should be a part of the bylaws, that there will be a formal financial policy. I think that's going to be necessary to have a true audit.
So two things on that, Mayor. We have already talked about possibly doing an investment policy. So this suggestion is timely if there's support for it. When we were an unincorporated association, there was no legal requirement for us to do an audit. And so it was done some years, and other years it may not have been done. Now that we're a JPA, we are going to have a CPA pursuant to the government code, have a formal annual audit done. As part of that process, we would work with the selected CPA firm to advise us on the policy and what we need to have in place to be a stable, strong organization. So I think once we have the CPA, which we're going to decide on next week or this week, the 14th, that is definitely something we would talk to the CPA firm about, whether or not it makes sense for us to have a policy based on the size of our organization. That's a discussion I think we will have. We've already talked about an investment policy. So my response to you, Mayor, would be, I appreciate the suggestion. I'll bring it back, but I actually would want to defer to the CPA firm to better advise us on whether or not we really need a documented financial policy, or maybe a paragraph is sufficient.
Okay, that makes sense to me.
Clarity on that? So that means you're intending, the JPA is intending to, or foresee themselves amassing funds in the future?
What do you mean amassing funds? So right now, as you know, 99% of our revenue comes from dues.
Right.
We may get an ABAC grant to fund specific projects. As a JPA, legally, we can now actually apply for grants. As an unincorporated association, based on different reasons, we couldn't, but now we can. Now, whether or not there are grant opportunities as a regional body we want to pursue or that we'd qualify for, we don't know, but legally, we can actually apply for certain grants now.
But I think that if we do so, I think it's important to clarify that we have further language on who will be responsible for those funds as well. So we need further clarity, because then based on accounts and records, I think that you would need more language to clarify what is needed on responsibility of grant funding and everything else.
And I think that's why even with the financial policy suggestion from the mayor, based on, where most of our revenue comes from, the size of our organization, we're not, doing these big projects or investments. But I think if our auditor looks at it and says, no, I advise you to have these kinds of terms, then that's something we would consider. Because right now with the ABAC grant, it's very directed at how we can spend it. So it's easy to manage those funds. Like, we can only spend it on planning collaborative. It has to go towards each city, a certain percent. So that's easy to manage. I can't imagine anything sitting here that the Cities Association would take on that's so complex and complicated that you need some kind of management process for it, but I don't know. So we have to do it based on as we learn as we go. And I think that's why it's good that we're going to have a CPA working alongside us.
So I guess it wouldn't be like bonds, future bonds or,
No.
Okay,
Oh,
thanks.
The city managers loved that. I'm just kidding.
Vice Mayor?
I don't think it's necessary to have a financial policy in place with the bylaws. I think we need to get the bylaws in place. And then after an appropriate period of time, or perhaps after an audit, after seeing what types of grants we want to pursue, actually functioning as a JPA for a period of time, I think is essential to create a sound financial policy. I think we should have a financial policy. I just don't think it needs to be, part of the bylaw exercise. I think it should, later on in the year.
I agree with the Vice Mayor.
Okay. Article 8, adoption and amendments. No? Would anyone like to make a motion?
The motion would be...
We don't need a motion, right? We're just giving you guidance.
You need a motion to authorize me.
Yeah, that's what,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
He asked.
Okay.
So I just had another quick question regarding amendments. Will any further amendments in the future, when you get amendments like down the road, a year, 2 years down the road, making sure that it comes back to each city council for approval like this?
So that's not that's a suggestion you're making where we could add language to
Yeah.
Article 8 to say that any amendment should go back to each member city for approval. I can say for me, we're starting a new organization, so it makes sense at this juncture to go to each council to give them an opportunity to weigh in. But as we move forward, if we need to make a tweak to finances, if we need to make a tweak, I really don't think it's a good use of our resources to have it go back to every 14 or 15 city every time we're making a change to the bylaws.
Well, I don't foresee a lot of changes happening.
But we tweak it, something may come up where we learn, like, okay, let's change the bylaws. And bear in mind, each city is represented, right? It's not the executive committee in a closed door meeting making changes. It will be at a public meeting with the board of directors where every city is represented and they get to vote on any bylaw change.
All right, does anyone else support Councilmember Liang's proposal of having any amendment come back to individual councils?
I don't think that's necessary.
Okay, then Vice Mayor, you have a motion to make?
I move that the City Council of the City of Los Altos authorize Councilmember Flagger to represent our views in the deliberations over the bylaws.
And to approve final changes.
Yes.
Thank you.
And to approve final changes.
Second?
Madam City Clerk?
Councilmember Liang?
Yes.
Councilmember Meadows?
Yes.
Councilmember Flagger?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Daley?
Yes.
Mayor Weinberg?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go back to our special presentation, and it is my honor tonight to give a proclamation in honor of the month of Ramadan. And let me start out by saying two things. First, thank you so much to so many members of the community who are here to join us tonight. The second thing I'm going to say is if I mispronounce a word, I apologize ahead of time. So what I would like to do is I'll read the proclamation, and then we're joined tonight by an imam. I will invite him to come to the podium and tell us some words about Ramadan, what it is and why it's important to our community. And again, thank you all for showing up. So, a proclamation of the Mayor of the City of Los Altos, California. Whereas Ramadan is the holiest month of the Islamic calendar and marks the first revelation of the Quran to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And whereas Ramadan is a time of spiritual reflection, self-discipline, and community building, observed by Muslims worldwide as one of the 5 pillars of Islam. And whereas during Ramadan, Muslims fast from dawn to sunset, refraining from food and drink. This act of fasting is not only a demonstration of discipline, but also a way to increase awareness of and to promote giving to the global poor, sick, and hungry, and a bridging of differences between people over a shared commitment to faith. Ramadan is also a time for Muslims to strengthen their relationships with family and friends, as well as to engage in acts of charity and community service. And whereas Ramadan reminds us that Islam has always been a part of the United States, and Muslims have made extraordinary contributions to our country. And whereas the end of Ramadan is commemorated by the Eid al-Fitr festival of breaking the fast, a joyous occasion marked by sharing sweets, gifts, and good tidings with family, friends, and neighbors. And whereas Los Altos joins with Muslims around the world celebrating Ramadan and Eid al-Fitr this year. Now, therefore, I, Jonathan Weinberg, Mayor of the City of Los Altos, do hereby proclaim March 10, 2024 to April 8, 2024 as the month of Ramadan.
Dear Mayor and City Council, everyone here, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, truly, from the deepest part of my heart, I would like to thank you for this proclamation and meaningful words. Actually, your proclamation has left me with nothing to say. So, so I'm going to skip that part because you already, thank you for reaching out to the Muslim community in Los Altos. I'll share just few remarks that came from my mind and heart tonight. Fasting in Ramadan from dawn to sunset makes us all speak a universal language, the language of hunger and thirst. 13 million children in the United States go to sleep hungry every night, according to some statistics, 11, 12, or 13 million. Los Altos is a city known for its highly educated and highly affluent community. Our Muslim community members here share these characteristics with the rest of the community. But I believe everyone in this room agrees that that's not how we measure success. It is our values and our ethics, it is our principles and our ideals that distinguish us and determines if we are successful or not. When the city of Los Altos recognizes a local faith community, a minority, moreover a misunderstood minority most of the time, the city of Los Altos is upholding its values and ideals of inclusivity, celebrating diversity, and making the city residents feel at home and feel that they belong. The meaning of Ramadan, it means to struggle, and our entire life is nothing but one struggle to another. It is our values and our principles that determine if we will be successful out of these struggles and how these struggles would shape us and mold us. Finally, I do see how you celebrate diversity. Just by looking at you, I see so many diversity here embraced, and our community here really come from different backgrounds, which enriches the culture of Los Altos. And I looked for what does Los Altos means. It meant heights. And I want to say all of you have taken the city of Los Altos to a new height by giving us this proclamation. Thank you very much. I only charge 500.
Thank you again to members of the community.
Thank you very much. So much. Thank you. Have our appreciation that I handed to each of the council members.
Oh, yes, please.
Look at him smile.
I'm getting something. I think.
These are our box of dates.
Oh.
Thank you very much. These are lovely. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wow. Thank you again so much to members of the community. Really appreciate it. Why don't we take a 10-minute recess? Thank you.
Is that something that can be done? Sure. All right, can we take a quick picture? Level 3, can we take a quick picture with the council, our whole group? Do you want us
You want to?
stay seated? And
We can come down. We'll,
kind of stand in front of people. We might be covering you a little bit. We can stand for this.
yeah, we could stand if that's. Yeah.
Mhm. All right, so come and take a picture, everyone. Ready?
I have a quick question for you. What is the appropriate way to say happy birthday? Or
Okay, so we are back at our meeting. We have one more item. I believe that we will complete our agenda for tonight because we have one more item. And that item is to adopt a resolution approving the city's updated mission statement. So do we have a staff report or?
Well, if you can believe it or not, I do not have a staff report, other than, staff worked with Councilmember Flagger as directed by council, and as proposed before you are 3 variations, at least to start from.
Okay. Are there any questions for Councilmember Flagger? All right, do we have any public comment? Yes. Well done.
I know. And it was together.
Eric, your comments on this subject are
I know.
Okay, then let me bring it back to council. I hate to keep putting you on the spot, Nisa, but since they're your suggestions, do you want to make any comments about how you came up to these and what your leanings were?
I'm happy to, Mayor. So I don't feel strongly about any of these 3 statements. I actually started out looking at what we had said and some of the things that majority or more of us liked about the other mission statements we looked at. And that's why I came up with these 3 drafts. I will say, and Mr. Maginot and Mr. England know this, I did them one at a time. I would draft one and send it to them. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. Maybe I should phrase it a little bit differently. And then I sent them a second. And then I was like, wait a minute. Like just one more. And so that's why we ended up with 3 options. Personally, honestly, I think I like option 3 the best of the 3. That's the last one I suggested. But honestly, I am not tied to any of these. I will not be offended if you guys reject all 3. But if we're looking at just these 3, I actually like the 3rd one, which is the last one I came up with because it's simple, and I think it covers everything we've talked about. And I think that was one of the things we all said. We wanted to keep it simple, to the point, and just have certain elements to it. And that's what I tried to do, especially in that 3rd one.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to look at everyone else, but before I do, just to say out loud what our options really are tonight. We can decide not to change our current mission statement at all. We can decide to adopt one of the 3 proposals that Councilmember Flagger came with. We could modify any of them or come up with something completely different. And I guess the last option we have, and I'm not advocating for this, but would be to hire a consultant, someone who specializes in communications and mission statements to come up with something different. I'm saying, see, no one's in that, but
I think there's one more.
What's the other option?
Must we have a mission statement?
Thank you. So that would be the other option, which I had not considered. I guess we could elect to do away with a mission statement altogether. So with that, Vice Mayor, you had a suggestion?
If we were to do ranked choice voting, my first choice would be to get rid of a mission statement entirely, and then the next choice would be the shortest one presented. So option 3.
Councilmember Meadows?
I think we discussed last time that most cities have some form of a mission statement, and I would support that we have a mission statement. If we were left with just the current one, I would just rescind and go without, but I think we have some options here. I also favor number 3. I don't see that the preamble in 1 and 2 really adds anything. I don't know if there's a way to get number 3 even shorter, foster and maintain, or I don't know. But so I think number 3 is decent there, and I don't know if we do anything to it or not, but that's we can discuss that.
Okay. Councilmember Liang?
I appreciate you working on this. Thank you. I'm not really excited like you said. I believe that we should have a very short and inspirational mission statement, but I just feel like we're just listing things just to list things. And I'm not excited about it. And I think that just because we have these three in front of us, we're not forced to choose one. And we can take our time and revisit and come back if we need to. But I don't think we should just say, let's adopt one because we want to adopt a new one. So that's my opinion.
Okay, I tend to find myself, I think, most closely aligned with Sally on this. I do think that the city should have a mission statement. I think it would really stick out if we didn't have a mission statement, and my apologies to Chair Steinley in the back. But I think that it is useful for both policymakers and for city staff to have some kind of an anchor to come back to and remind ourselves of why we're doing what we're doing. And of the three that are before us tonight, I do like option 3 the best of them. I'm fine with the way it is right now. I think we could take out the words "and maintain." Yeah. That would make it a little bit shorter. But I think foster a safe, healthy, sustainable, vibrant, and inclusive community sends the same message as foster and maintain. So that's where I am right now.
How about just to be?
Yeah.
Instead of to foster and maintain, just to be a safe, healthy, sustainable, vibrant, inclusive community, etc.
And I'll build on that and make it, again, the city's mission is kind of a preamble, not necessarily part of it. The city's mission is to be a sustainable, vibrant, and inclusive community in which to live, work, visit, and play. I would actually get rid of the safe and healthy, so, as you said, our mission is to be a sustainable, vibrant, and inclusive community in which to live, work, visit, and play.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, I think so too.
I like it.
Yeah.
Do we want to sleep? Do we want to sleep on it?
Can we vote on it? Can we call the question, please, Mayor?
Well,
It can be on consent next time,
Yeah.
and then, if we don't sleep on it well, I think it's okay to sleep on it. Again, depending on the feeling around here, but that's as simple and bare bones,
And I like
think.
it. I like how we have gotten rid of some
Pared
of
it
the words,
down.
pared it down.
I do too. And since we're doing something that's different from what was in the packet, I think it makes sense for us to bring it back. So if someone in the community feels strongly, they have an opportunity to let us know.
So when you say sleeping on this, I just want to remind everybody of the story of the Princess and the Pea.
What? How is this analogous?
Is this story time?
Do I need to relay the story?
No, we are.
So, city staff, I think the direction from council is to bring it back one more time on consent. Did you get the wordsmith mission statement?
Before we put it on our wall, I want us to sleep on it one more time. Yes.
I will make sure that they are the appropriate commas. Can I restate what I heard? The city's mission is to be a sustainable, vibrant, and inclusive community in which to live, work, visit, and play?
Yes.
Well, we don't speak to people's quality of life, which is sad.
Well, if all that happens, they have a good quality of life.
That's what quality of life
Yeah.
is. It's all those things. That's why I took it out.
It sounds like never mind.
Okay, then I think we are done with this agenda item. Next item of business, I think, are the 3 informational items, which we do not take up. They're there for the council's and the public's information and to be perused at their leisure. Council and staff reports and direction on future agenda items. Who would like to go first? All right, well, I'll say that I attended the Lolly event over the weekend regarding the proposed library patio. I guess the next step is going to be for Lolly to move forward with the submission of an application. So we have a member from Lolly here tonight. I'm sure she's excited about that, and she'll be handing plans over to her seatmate to the left, and the Planning Commission will get its first project to really sink its teeth into. And I have no items for future agenda, no proposed future agenda items. So, anyone else? Vice Mayor?
I do have a proposed item. I'm not sure how we should treat it, and it's going to come back to us anyway. Well, in some sense it is. So we're gonna weigh in again after the plan has been reviewed by planning, and when it gets when it gets time to award the contract or something.
Are we talking about the patio?
Yeah.
It depends on the path it takes, and we haven't seen an application yet, so it's hard to determine which way it will go. There are paths where it could come back to council. There are paths where it could stay with the Planning Commission.
Okay, so that's all just background anyway. I'm concerned because I have seen a lot of division in our community over the orchard, and it saddens me greatly because there is no council in the history of this city, nor has there been an administration in the history of this city that has done more to preserve and protect the heritage orchard. However, there are no boundaries to the heritage orchard, and yet members of our orchard commons.
Forgive me.
Yes,
We're
I'm getting into
discussion.
discussion.
Yeah.
So anyway, the division makes me wonder if there's a role that council has to sort of set the record straight on our civic center grounds and the rules by which we continue to pursue the highest, best use of this property for our residents.
So are you proposing a study session or a discussion item to identify the civic center assets and what the city's responsibility is to each of them? Is that what you're asking?
That might be inappropriate.
Over there.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, without getting into a discussion, I think you should wait until this project goes through the environmental review and the planning commission, because all of that is going to be part of the record that goes forward, and boundaries and
Well,
all
I'm
of that
perfectly
will
fine
be.
waiting until after that. I think
Yeah.
that's appropriate, for sure. But I want to tee it up as something that we may want to weigh in on at some point, because not doing so leaves a lot of conflict ongoing.
So let me make a request. Why don't you talk about your ideas with the city manager in your next one-on-one, and at the next meeting, maybe you have a more clear ask of exactly what you want us to do.
Well, could I add on that, Vice Mayor? Because I hear your concerns. I have some concerns. And I think there's questions like you raised. You said something about boundaries. And I think we should get some clarification on the boundaries of our historic orchard. So maybe we should have a discussion about that.
With this project going forward and it going through the environmental review, I would not recommend us trying to preempt or try to establish that that's all going to be part of the record, and everybody will be able to comment during the project review.
Okay, so for now, let's just not add it to a future agenda item, but know that it may come back up when we have more information to formulate an approach to treat this.
And then for that said, making sure that if it needs to go to historic as well and understand the secret process around it, that it may be coming back to us.
So I'm going to just share that the historic evaluation that is required by CEQA will look at all of that.
If I may, sorry to
we're
interrupt you,
good.
Director. When the application is submitted, staff will evaluate it and put it on the appropriate path. I think that's all we could say, because there's nothing in front of the city yet.
Well, we're discussing future agendas, so I guess we wanted clarity if it should be
So
added to our
are you
agenda.
proposing a future agenda item?
Yes, I am.
Okay, what is your future agenda item
So
proposal?
there seems to have been some contradictory opinions about what the city can and can't do under our current Muni Code regarding waivers and staff monetary support of events. So I would like to have an agenda item to see if our policies our Muni Code and policies need to be looked at and to be applied more equally.
I'm confused. What are you talking about?
Well, I think we got some people raising concerns when facilities are given waivers. And so I think that we need to revisit some of our Muni codes and policies to make sure that everybody is treated fairly and equally.
Okay, is there any support for that?
Well, I thought, City Manager, you said you're bringing something forward.
I believe Councilmember Liang is talking about fee waivers for facility use as opposed to permit fees. So we council recently adopted the fee waiver policy. We've been applying that as adopted.
Right. So you're not talking about special events, because special events are something you had said, that's a
so-
different thing.
Correct. Special events will come back, yes.
Right. And the fee waivers that, if you're, so are you talking about special events or fee waivers?
Fee
Councilmember?
waivers.
Well, okay, so that's something we've already recently adopted then.
Yes, but I think it needs further cleanup.
All right, is there support on council for that? All right, I don't see any. Do you have any other proposed future agenda items?
No, I just thought I'd raise that to make sure that if there's a chance to clean up the language, we can.
Anything to report?
I too went to the event at the library, and then, no, that's it.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, Councilmember Flagger?
Thank you, Mayor. I'll start off by just recognizing and thank you for your leadership tonight. It was clear the community appreciated the proclamation, and I think recognizing your leadership in bringing it forward should be publicly done, and so I just wanted to thank you.
Thank you.
I do have a quick question for Mr. England. On the Lacey building, as we move forward with converting it to offices, will we keep the playground?
I believe we will keep the playground. If it's going to move, we may have to relocate it,
Okay.
but I think the plan is to keep it in place.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anything from staff?
Not tonight, Mayor.
Okay, then at 9:15 PM, we are adjourned.